Chapter 2286. Mo Tanyan looked at Jianshan in admiration and sighed emotionally. Back then, when my clone saw you on the Yinyang Saint Rock, you were nowhere close to godhood. I never thought that in just a short century or two, you would become an influential figure in the Saints' world. In the current Saints' world, aside from those hermits who remain in seclusion for many years, there's basically no one who doesn't know your name. Mo Tanyan smiled mysteriously towards the end. Jianshan smiled awkwardly. Naturally, he knew that Mo Tanyan was referring to the fact that he was wanted by the Azure Pung King and the Solitary Sword Ancestor. Indeed, a mere divine king was wanted by the peak experts of the Saints' world, the Azure Pung King and the Solitary Sword Ancestor. It had indeed caused quite a stir in the Saints' world, where it had even attracted the attention of many large organizations. Senior Mo Tianyan, how did you find me? Are you a part of the Radiant Saint Hall as well? Jianshan asked the question that was on his mind. I'm not a part of the Radiant Saint Hall, but it's not difficult for me to find you. Mo Tianyun smiled mysteriously. He stared at Jianshan amicably and said, Do you still remember the pagoda-shaped saint artifact you obtained from the Radiant Saint Masters of the Tian Yuan continent? Of course, Jianshan said. The Radiant Saint artifact had been of great help to him back in the lower world. It was all thanks to the Radiant Saint artifact that he could become a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. However, the Radiant Saint artifact was limited in quality. As his strength increased, the Radiant Saint artifact was no longer of any use to him. As a result, he did not really use it after coming to the Saints' world. I was able to find you in the vast Saints' world because of the Radiant Saint artifact on you. In the past, a clone of mine had descended to the lower world and entered the Radiant Saint artifact. It removed the seal within the Radiant Saint artifact along the way, freeing the Radiant Saint Force origin energy that was sealed within. When I removed the seal, I also left behind an extremely well-hidden imprint in the Saint artifact. As a result, I'll be able to find you as long as you keep the Radiant Saint artifact on you after you come to the Saints' world, Mo Tanyan said. In other words, Senior already knew when I arrive in the Saints' world, Jianshan said. At the same time, he finally understood that Mo Tanyan was the one who had broken the seal that not even the artifact spirit could do anything about. This made him feel more or less grateful to Mo Tianyan. After all, if it were not for the fact that the seal within the Saint artifact had been removed, freeing the origin energy trapped within, it would have been impossible for him to become a Class 9 Radiant Saint Master. Mo Tanyan shook his head. I don't know exactly when you came to the Saints' world because I need a corresponding secret technique to sense the imprint I left in the Radiant Saint artifact. Jianshan became extremely excited after suddenly seeing the greatest human expert of the past on the Tian Yuan continent. Afterwards, Jianshan and Mo Tanyan set up a stone table outside the dwelling. They began a long conversation under the starry night sky. Senior Mo Tianyan, Junior wants to verify something. The winged tiger that appeared on the Tian Yuan continent in ancient times should be the same person as Senior Mo Tanyan, right? Or should I say, it's a clone of Senior Mo Tianyan? Jianshan asked. He had gradually begun to suspect this when he was on the Tian Yuan continent, based on his understanding of the matters of ancient times. He was just uncertain. What clues did you use to arrive at this conclusion? Mo Tianyan remained the same as he calmly asked. Jianshan composed himself and sorted out his thoughts. Only then did he slowly say, Firstly, out of the 4 great experts of the past on the Tian Yuan continent, the war god Ruijin of the 100 races and Poseidon of the sea race can be found in ancient records. Only you and the winged tiger of the beast god continent appeared out of nowhere. As soon as you appeared before the world, you were already figures who had surpassed the Holy Emperor. I can't find any information about your growth at all in ancient records. Secondly, the world on the Tian Yuan continent was actually sealed up by a formation over 3 million years ago. It's impossible for anyone to break through to the origin realm. The reason why Ruijin of the 100 races could reach the origin realm was because of his powerful bloodline. The reason why Poseidon of the sea race could reach the origin realm was because he was the same as Shaoling, an innate spirit. Once an innate spirit is formed, they will possess the cultivation of the origin realm and will not be restricted by the world. In other words, whether it's Regine or Poseidon, there's a reason why they could reach the origin realm. Only Senior Mo Tianyun and the Winged Tiger have no reason at all. You're extremely similar in this aspect. Thirdly, according to the information I've found in ancient records, Senior Mo Tianyun vanished as well after the Winged Tiger vanished from the Tianyuan continent with the dragons and phoenixes. Mo Tianyun smiled mysteriously. You've determined that I'm the Winged Tiger just because of that? Have you never considered that I went to where the Inyang Saint Rock was and suppressed it after the Winged Tiger left with the dragons and phoenixes? But it was only a clone of yours that suppressed the Inyang Saint Rock. This clone can also be understood as the Winged Tiger's clone, Jinshin said. He stared at Mo Tianyun with shining eyes and continued, Of course, that still doesn't mean that Senior and the Winged Tiger are the same person. What made me come to that conclusion was Shaoling. Mo Tianyun's eyes narrowed when he heard Shaoling's name. A sliver of undetectable killing intent flashed through the depths of his eyes. Naturally, the killing intent was not targeted at Shaoling. Instead, it was targeted at the heavenless demon Exalt. In the past, Shaoling had once sensed Senior's presence on me when I was in Mercenary City. However, Senior had already vanished from the Tianyuan continent for 1,000,000 years at that time, so it was impossible for me to have any contact with Senior. Back then, even I did not understand why Shaoling could sense Senior's presence on me. However, as my strength rapidly increased, and I learned more and more, I finally understood that the presence Shaoling sensed on me was clearly the presence of the young Winged Tiger. Back then, the White Tiger had only been born recently, so it was obviously unable to hide its presence. At the same time, I had interacted with the Winged Tiger for a long time, so its presence was obviously on me. What Shaoling sensed back then was the presence of the Winged Tiger rather than her master's presence. This presence also belonged to the Winged Tiger, but it belonged to a different person. As a result, the presence that Shaoling sensed was extremely faint. Only when the White Tiger rapidly matured and learned to hide its presence did the presence change slightly. Only then was Shaoling unable to sense any presence from the White Tiger at all. There's one last point, which is the 18 beast furs that have been passed down on the Tianyuan continent for many years. These beast furs should have come from the fur of the Winged Tiger, but when the 18 beast furs were gathered together, Senior's legacy appeared, the Way of Slaughter. Senior comprehended the Way of Slaughter, and the legacy that the White Tiger obtained from the Beast God Hall was also the Way of Slaughter. Jianshan did not continue when he reached there. Instead, he stared at Mo Tianyun quietly. The image of the female lead of this book, Yu, has been posted. To those who want to see it, please follow Xiaoyao's WeChat account and reply to his messages. Chapter 2287. Mo Tianyun was in no hurry to speak after hearing Jinshin's analysis. His expression did not change at all either. He continued to stare at Jianshan leisurely, but the admiration in his eyes deepened. You're right. The Winged Tiger that appeared in ancient times is indeed me, Mo Tianyun said steadily. He did not deny this matter. Senior, who are you? Jinshin stared at Mo Tianyun deeply. Mo Tianyun smiled. I don't think it's important who I am. What's important is that you know that I have no ill intentions towards you. Of course, if you really want to know my origins, you can ask the Sword Spirits. They should have guessed it already. Mo Tianyun, do you really come from the immortals world? At this moment, the Sword Spirits appeared. All that could be seen were faint figures condensed from mist. It was impossible to sense their presences at all, nor did they radiate with any sword chi. Clearly, the Sword Spirits knew that this was the territory of the Radiant Saint Hall, so they did their best to conceal themselves. Mo Tianyun stared at the Sword Spirits and nodded. He said nothing. Mo Tianyun, since you're from the immortals world, why have you appeared in the saints' world? And what's the situation in the immortals world right now? Is the Sword Sect of Purple Heavens doing well? The Sword Spirits asked. As soon as they mentioned the Sword Sect of Purple Heavens, The two sword spirits became nervous. Hearing this, Mo Tianyun seemed to remember what had happened in the past. This caused a trace of sadness to flash through the depths of his eyes. There was also a deep sense of hatred mixed within. In the end, Mo Tianyun sighed gently and gave a selective answer. It's already been 1,000,000 years since I left the Immortals world. I only know that the sword sect of Purple Heavens from 1,000,000 years ago has suffered heavy losses after the battle that happened over 3,000,000 years ago. It's gradually declining. As for the current situation of the sword sect of Violet Heavens, I truly do not know. Has the sword sect of Purple Heavens already declined? Xing murmured softly. Her eyes were dim, and she was in low spirits. The sword sect of Violet Heavens lost far too many experts in that battle. Their decline was within expectations. As long as the legacy of the sword sect of Violet Heavens remains, there will come a day when they become powerful again, Qing Suo said. At this moment, she couldn't help but think of the Samsara Immortal Venerable's warning that Jianshan shouldn't return to the immortal world easily before he was strong enough. For some reason, Qing Suo suddenly felt an ill omen when she thought of the Samsara Immortal Venerable's words at a time like this. Mo Tanyan looked at Jianshan and said, Jianshan, since you're a fighter and a hallowed Saint Master, you must possess martial soul force. However, you must remember that you have to hide the existence of the sword spirits in the Saint's world, and you have to hide your identity as a martial soul force user in the Radiant Saint Hall. You cannot expose your identity as a martial soul force user in the Radiant Saint Hall. Thank you for your concern, Senior. I already know that the martial soul lineage has grievances with the Radiant Saint Hall, so I will never expose my martial soul force in the Radiant Saint Hall, said Jianshan. Afterwards, he paused and looked at Mo Tianyun eagerly. He asked, Senior Mo Tianyun, may I ask how much you know about martial soul force? There are just too few people from the martial soul lineage in the Saints world, so there aren't many legends about martial soul force in the Saints world. I haven't come into contact with people from the martial soul lineage either, so I don't know much about this power. Mo Tianyun replied before looking at the Radiant Saint Hall that stood above the clouds in the distance. He said, the Tower of Radiance in the Radiant Saint Hall records all the cultivation methods and battle skills of Radiant Saint Masters. It's so abundant that it even surpasses what the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall knows. As a matter of fact, even the cultivation methods and battle skills of the leader and the vice leaders come from the Tower of Radiance. As a result, if you want to understand martial soul force, you can only go to the Tower of Radiance. Are there really so many records in the Tower of Radiance? Jianshan asked in surprise. Mo Tianyun did not answer. Instead, he looked at Xing and Qing Suo and said, the Tower of Radiance is anything but simple. However, I think you, two sword spirits, have heard about the origins of the Tower of Radiance at least once. We do know a little. Xing nodded. It said that the Tower of Radiance of the Radiant Saint Hall is a peak god artifact on the same level as our Azulite swords and the Enata Grand Prime's Enata Tower. It has existed for an extremely long time. What? The Tower of Radiance is actually so powerful. Jinshan's heart shuddered when he heard that. He asked, since the Radiant Saint Hall possesses such a powerful god artifact, doesn't that mean there aren't a lot of organizations on the desolate plane that are bold enough to provoke the Radiant Saint Hall? You're right. Let alone on this plane, even across the entire Saints world, there aren't a lot of organizations that are bold enough to provoke an organization that possesses a peak god artifact. It's just a pity that the artifact spirit no longer exists in the Tower of Radiance of the Radiant Saint Hall. Mo Tianyun explained to Jianshan. He had spent a lot of time in the Saints world, so his understanding of the Tower of Radiance clearly exceeded that of the sword spirits. Speaking of which, the Radiant Saint Hall is actually one of the oldest legacies in the history of the Saints world. Their legacy has existed for 2 eras at the very least, while the Tower of Radiance was forged by a Grand Exalt of the Radiant Saint Hall in the era before that, Jianshan said. During the glorious history of the Radiant Saint Hall, the Tower of Radiance had experienced several intense battles. In the final battle, the most powerful Tower of Radiance of the Radiant Saint Hall was finally heavily injured. The artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance had died in that battle as well. As a result, the current Tower of Radiance can only be used as a safe place to store various records to the Radiant Saint Hall. It has no other use. Jianshun gained a new understanding of the Radiant Saint Hall from Imo Tianyun's explanation. However, he also became doubtful. He asked in confusion, has no one been able to refine the Tower of Radiance since then? And why is the Tower of Radiance only a place to store records? Can't the Radiant Saint Hall hide in the Tower of Radiance when they encounter powerful enemies? The Tower of Radiance seems to be rather special. Anyway, according to my understanding, no one in the Radiant Saint Hall has been able to refine the Tower of Radiance. Probably only the leaders who have come into contact with the core secrets of the Tower of Radiance know the exact reason, Mo Tianyun said. Moreover, the Tower of Radiance isn't as simple as you imagine it to be. When the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance died, its remnant consciousness filled every inch of space in the Tower of Radiance. Every single hallowed Saint Master who enters the Tower of Radiance will be pressured by the remnant consciousness of the artifact spirit at all times. Without sufficient strength, it's impossible for them to remain in there for long periods of time. Even the Divine King of Radiance struggles to remain in there for more than a year. Chapter 2288. Senior Mo Tianyun, you seem to know the Radiant Saint Hall extremely well. Mo Tianyun smiled mysteriously when he heard that. He said, I've come to the Radiant Saint Hall many times. I've entered their sacred hall as well, so I know a little more about the Radiant Saint Hall. It looks like Senior Mo Tianyun has close ties with some of the members of the upper echelon of the Radiant Saint Hall, Jianshun thought. Afterwards, he thought of something and asked, Senior Mo Tianyun, may I ask how I can enter the Tower of Radiance? Since Mo Tianyun knew the upper echelon of the Radiant Saint Hall, he obviously knew more than his teacher, Han Xin. If he could learn the easiest way to enter the Tower of Radiance from Mo Tianyun, it would be a good thing for Jianshun. After a moment of thought, Mo Tianyun said, every time the Tower of Radiance is opened, it requires at least 2 vice leaders to personally take action. As a result, the Tower of Radiance isn't a place you can enter just because you want to. The easiest method is to become a vice leader's disciple and have them open the Tower of Radiance for you alone. That's the easiest method for you. Once everyone learns about your talent, there should be quite a few vice leaders who will be willing to accept you as their disciple. After all, you're the only hallowed Saint Master with a one-colored soul core in the past 1,000,000 years. Moreover, the Radiant Saint Hall is about to hold a new chosen saint. Once the chosen saint is chosen, the Tower of Radiance will open once. Every chosen saint can bring 9 retainers into the Tower of Radiance. Mo Tianyun paused. He looked at Jianshun as if he was smiling and said, you can choose to become one of the 9 retainers of the chosen saint and enter the Tower of Radiance with the chosen saint. That's the second method of entry. If you don't, you can only choose the last method. The Tower of Radiance opens once every 500 years. Every time it opens, it'll be open to all Radiant Saint Masters. Afterwards, they'll use their merit and contributions to exchange for time in the Tower of Radiance. However, I don't recommend you to use the last method because only 200 or 300 years have passed since the last time the Tower of Radiance opened. As a result, you'll have to wait another 200 years at the very least. Jianshun frowned when he heard that. He murmured, 200 years is indeed a little too long. However, the first method will increase the risk of my martial soul force being exposed. In other words, I can only become a retainer of a chosen saint. Becoming a retainer of a chosen saint is not a simple matter. In the history of the Radiant Saint Hall, the 9 retainers of every single chosen saint are all peak experts of the Divine King. Although no peak Radiant Saint Master like the Divine King had appeared in the Radiant Saint Hall in recent years, the retainers of the chosen saint were no weaker than early Divine King either. Right now, you're only equivalent to a receival expert as a Radiant Saint Master, said Mo Tianyun. His meaning was very clear. With Jianshun's current strength, he did not even have the right to become a retainer of a chosen saint. It looks like becoming a retainer of a chosen saint is as difficult as ascending to the heavens for me right now. Jianshan smiled bitterly. At this moment, he had no idea what to do. Did he really have to wait for 200 years? This was because the Tower of Radiance really did possess what he needed. He even had the opportunity to obtain cultivation methods and battle skills that were much more powerful than everything the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had learnt in his entire life. This was because Mo Tianyin had already revealed that whether it was the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall or the vice leaders, everything they learnt in their lives came from the Tower of Radiance. As a result, he had to enter the Tower of Radiance. However, out of all the options before him, only the third one was feasible. He had never considered taking on someone like a vice leader as his master. Without a doubt, it would increase the risk of him being exposed. Even if he could hide the existence of the sword spirits, he was not completely confident about hiding his martial soul force. As a vice leader of the Radiant Saint Hall, his cultivation definitely exceeded Jianshan's. Someone like that would possess an understanding and comprehension of Radiant Saint Force and the laws of the Hallowed. They were existences that Jianshan could only look up to. As long as he made even the slightest mistake, he would face the risk of exposing his martial soul force. However, becoming a retainer of a chosen saint required a 7-colored soul core at the very least. He had only just condensed a 1-colored soul core, so he was nowhere near that level. Xian Ming, who hid in the Inata Tower, had a father who was one of the 8 vice leaders of the Radiant Saint Hall. He had considered using Xian Ming's connections, but he had rejected that idea as well. Xian Ming already knew that he was a fighter. If he went to find Xian Ming, he would be exposing his martial soul force. Mo Tianyin smiled when he saw Jianshan frown. He said, "If you're willing to become a retainer of a chosen saint, I do have a pretty good idea." "What is it?" Jianshan immediately asked. As long as he could enter the Tower of Radiance, he would be extremely willing to become a retainer of a chosen saint temporarily. Mo Tianyin waved his hand, and a fist-sized ball of light immediately appeared. The moment he saw the ball of light, Jianshan immediately felt an uncontrollable desire from the depths of his soul. He was tempted to devour the ball of light immediately. Moreover, the ball of light gave off a feeling that made Jianshan's soul feel extremely comfortable. He only glanced at it a few times, but he felt like the power of his soul was skyrocketing. This is the purest soul power that has been formed from the soul of an expert after all the impurities have been removed. The purest soul, Jianshan exclaimed. He just happened to see the description of the purest soul in the space ring he had obtained, so he recognized it with a single glance. This purest soul actually makes me feel an irrepressible urge. It looks like this purest soul has been refined from the soul of a primordial realm expert at the very least, Jianshan said sternly. His gaze was extremely mixed. Primordial realm experts were existences that stood at the very top of the pyramid in the saint's world. In the past, they were great figures in his eyes, yet now he saw a purest soul refined from the soul of a primordial realm expert. The owner of this purest soul is an infinite prime, so the power of the soul within the purest soul is so dense that it's enough to tempt any divine king. It's enough to tempt the 9-star geniuses who are about to compete for the position of chosen saint, said Mo Tianyin. The light in Jianshan's eyes flickered when he heard that. He hesitated, but in the end, he shook his head and said, "Senior, this is far too valuable. I can't accept it." Mo Tianyin smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'm not giving this purest soul to you for nothing. I'll use this and various other treasures to make a deal with you. May I ask what you've taken a fancy to, senior?" Jianshan's heart tightened. He suddenly thought of the Inata Tower on him. Chapter 2289. It had already been a few days since he had left planet Tianming. After so much time, the news of him possessing the Inata Tower had probably been leaked. The Inata Tower was a peak god artifact. Even though it was damaged, its value was still enough to drive many peak experts mad. What happened on planet Tianming was the best example of this. As a result, when Jianshan heard that Mo Tianyin wanted to make a deal with him, he subconsciously thought of the Inata Tower. Aside from the Inata Tower, he could not think of anything else on him that could catch Mo Tianyin's attention. "Senior, Have you taken a fancy to the Inata Tower as well? Jianshan asked. The value of the Inata Tower was far greater than the pure soul. If Mo Tianyan really did take a fancy to the Inata Tower, what was he supposed to do? Mo Tianyan could not help but smile bitterly as he looked at Jianshan's stern face. He said, the Inata Tower is a hot potato. It's not something that just anyone can get their hands on. If Exan from the Heavenly Palace of Bishing decides to look into it, there won't be a lot of people in the entire Saints world who can protect it. My deal with you is for you to take action once. You want me to take action once? Jianshan was surprised when he heard that. He revealed a strange expression and said, Senior Mo Tianyan, with my strength, I probably won't be able to help you at all. Mo Tianyan shook his head gently and said, don't underestimate yourself. You have a sword spirits. Even though you're still very weak right now, even though the sword spirits haven't recovered to their peak condition, once the twin swords fuse, their power will be enough to shock the world. Mo Tianyan looked at Jianshan sternly. As for me, I need you to fuse the twin swords once. No, Master, you can't agree to that. Master, you can't do that. The backlash from fusing the twin swords is just too great. You can't do that unless you're at the end of your rope. Before Jianshan could say anything, Ziying and Qing Sua immediately objected. To the two sword spirits, fusing the twin swords was a taboo that they could not touch unless they were at the end of their rope. This was because even their master, who had reached the peak of Grand Exalt, had died to the backlash of fusing the twin swords, let alone Jianshan. Jianshan remained calm. He looked at Mo Tianyan and said, Senior Mo Tianyan, can you tell me the reason? Why do you need me to fuse the twin swords once? Mo Tianyan sighed softly. He stood up from the stone bench and stood on the edge of the overgrown cliff. He raised his head and gazed at the round moon in the sky that was emitting pure moonlight. He said, there is no harm in telling you. The me you see right now is actually one of my 9 great clones. As for my original body, it is trapped by an opponent using a powerful formation. The formation is powerful, but it can't trap me forever. I only need several tens of thousand years to break out of the formation with my own strength. However, something happened on the cloud plane not long ago. Shaoling was taken away by the heavenless demon Exalt of the Tian Empire. The heavenless demon Exalt is a demonic cultivator. With Shaoling in his hands, she's in danger at all times. As a result, my original body needs to break free immediately. What? Shaoling's been taken away? Jianshan's face changed drastically. He suddenly stood up, and his gaze became extremely piercing as killing intent rose up in him. He had already begun to treat Shaoling as his own sister. He could not allow anything to happen to Shaoling. Senior Mo Tianyan, what's the heavenless demon Exalt cultivation? Jianshan asked sternly. His face was ugly. He's just reached the 4th heavenly layer of Grand Prime. He's not much weaker than the Azure Pung that hunted you down, said Mo Tianyan. Jianshan's heart sank after learning about the heavenless demon Exalt's strength. He felt powerless. In his eyes, a 4th heavenly layer Grand Prime was an unreachable existence. You don't need to worry. As long as my original body breaks free, the heavenless demon Exalt is nothing to worry about, said Mo Tianyan indifferently, as if he did not take the heavenless demon Exalt seriously at all. If that's the case, let's go right now, Senior Mo Tianyan. I'll use the fusion of the twin swords to help you break free from the seal, Jianshan said without any hesitation. He was panic-stricken. He was extremely worried about Shaoling's safety. Master, the fusion of the twin swords is too dangerous. Master, don't be rash. The sword spirits constantly tried to persuade Jianshan. In their eyes, there was no need for Jianshan to use the fusion of the twin sword for something so trivial. The price was not worth it. Ziying, Qing Sua, there's no need to say anything more. As long as I can save Shaoling, I'm willing to pay any price, Jianshan said firmly. You don't need to worry too much. The fusion of the twin swords is not necessarily a bad thing for Jianshan. Jianshan cultivates the chaotic body, but according to my understanding of chaotic force, even if he reaches the peak of major accomplishment, it's still fake chaotic force. The power that can split apart worlds from the fusion of the twin swords is true chaotic force. The reason why the previous master of the twin swords died in the fusion was because he did not cultivate the chaotic body, so he was unable to endure the impact of chaotic force. However, Jianxun is completely different. If he uses the fusion of the twin swords, he'll be able to sense true chaotic force, Mo Tianyun explained to the sword spirits. Hearing this, the sword spirits immediately fell silent. They also knew that what Mo Tianyun said was actually reasonable. Mo Tianyun then looked at Jianxun and said, I still need to make some preparations to break through the seal. There are some secrets that only you and I know. No one else can know about them. Wait for me for 3 days. I'll come find you in 3 days. Jianxun nodded. He obviously knew that Mo Tianyun was referring to their identities. Once their identities as people from the immortals world were exposed, there would be no place for them in the saints' world. Afterwards, Mo Tianyun left. He left silently, such that even Jianxun was unable to find any traces of him. After Mo Tianyun's departure, Jianxun was no longer in the mood to cultivate. Xiao Ling had been captured, and she had ended up in the hands of a demonic cultivator. No one knew how she was doing right now, which made Jianxun uneasy. He was extremely worried about Xiao Ling. Who knows what Ming Dong is doing? Didn't he set off for the cloud plane long ago? Why did he let Xiao Ling be captured? Jianxun grumbled inside. At that moment, he even planned on handing the Enata Tower to the heavenly palace of Bishing immediately and asking the First Majesty for assistance. However, after thinking about it, he still felt that Mo Tianyun was more reliable. After all, Mo Tianyun was the same as him. They were both people who truly cared about Xiao Ling. Only in the next 3 days did Jianxun truly understand what a day felt like a year. During those 3 days, he was in no mood to cultivate at all. When he went to see Han Xin at the top of the mountain every morning, he would be absent-minded. Chapter 2290. Little junior brother, what's wrong with you recently? Why do you always look so miserable? If you have something that makes you unhappy, you can tell senior sister. Maybe senior sister can help you. I might be able to help you. Baiyu whispered into Jianxun's ear. Her breath smelled like orchids as she gave off a refreshing fragrance. Her voice was filled with concern. Even Han Xin could tell that something was wrong with Jianxun. He only asked a few simple questions and did not delve into the matter. Zhuofeng remained as cold as before. He did not seem to care about Jianxun at all. Finally, 3 days passed. On this day, Jianxun specially asked for leave from teacher Han Xin. He did not go to the top of the mountain. Instead, he stood outside his dwelling and waited for Mo Tianyun's arrival quietly. Junior brother, so this is where your dwelling is. I've finally found you. Look at you. Why did you choose such a remote place for a dwelling? You made me look for you for quite a while. And this place is so messy. There are weeds everywhere. How can you use this place as a dwelling? At this moment, Baiyu slowly flew over from afar under the envelopment of a ball of radiant saint force. Junior sister, why have you come? Jianxun frowned when he saw Baiyu standing before him. Baiyu wrinkled her nose and showed displeasure. She snorted, What junior sister? You should be calling me second senior sister. I've said before that you're not allowed to call me junior sister before you surpass me in strength. Baiyu circled around Jianxun as she stared at Jianxun with her large, bright eyes. She said, Junior brother, you've been very strange in the past few days. And you didn't go to teacher Han Xion's lecture this morning. I'm worried about you, so I've specially come to see you. Thank you for your concern, junior sister. I'm fine. I plan on cultivating in seclusion. Please return, Jianxun said before turning around and entering the dwelling. He activated the protective formation, blocking Baiyu outside. He was constantly worried about Xiao Ling and was in no mood to chat with Baiyu. Baiyu stood outside Jianxun's dwelling and stared at the entrance that had been enveloped by formations. She pouted unhappily and mumbled, You're treating my good intentions as ill intent. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have come to see you. After Baiyu left, Mo Tianyun silently appeared there. With a flash, He passed through the low-level formation Jianshan had set up at the entrance of the dwelling and entered the dwelling. Senior Mo Tianyun, can we set off now? Upon seeing Mo Tianyun, Jianshan's expression immediately brightened. The longer we delay, the more danger Xiao Ling will be in. There's no time to lose. Let's go right now. Mo Tianyun said before grabbing Jianshan's shoulder with one hand and taking out a simple talisman with the other. After activating the talisman, a teleportation power immediately surged out, enveloping the two of them and making them disappear. When Jianshan reappeared, he had arrived in a vast expanse of outer space. He knew that he had already left the desolate plain. Who knew how far away he was from the desolate plain right now? Could it be that Senior Mo Tianyun's true body is trapped here? Jianshan thought. The light in his eyes flickered as he carefully studied every inch of space, but he failed to find anything out of the ordinary. At this moment, the space near them suddenly twisted violently. A huge spatial crack suddenly appeared, and under Jianshan's gaze, a meteor actually charged out from the spatial crack. The moment he saw the meteor, Jianshan's eyes suddenly narrowed. This was because an old man with a sword on his back actually sat on the meteor. Even though the old man seemed ordinary and did not give off any presence at all, Jianshan could sense an extremely dangerous presence from him. To no surprise, he was the solitary sword ancestor. However, Jianshan had only heard about the solitary sword ancestor before. He had never seen him in person, so he failed to recognize him. Are the three successors satisfied? Mo Tianyun stared at the solitary sword ancestor who sat on the meteor and asked calmly. The solitary sword ancestor's face was glowing, and he was brimming with energy. It was possible to tell that he was extremely excited. He said straightforwardly, satisfied, satisfied. I'm extremely satisfied. I owe you a huge favor this time. You'll be able to return this favor very soon. Mo Tianyun smiled indifferently. Afterwards, he formed a seal with one hand and struck at the space before him. Immediately, the calm space suddenly began to twist violently, forming a space gate that was several hundred meters wide. Let's go in, Mo Tianyun called out to the solitary sword ancestor before striding in with Jianshan. Inside the space gate was a completely empty space. There were no stars, no light, only darkness as far as the eye could see. The solitary sword ancestor left the meteor and crossed through space, arriving in the miniature world with just a single step. He studied the surroundings and said, I never thought that such a tough miniature world would be hidden here. If I hadn't looked carefully, I really would have struggled to discover its existence. The solitary sword ancestor looked at Mo Tianyun and said, Is your original body trapped here? Mo Tianyun nodded. He pointed forward and said, You must have sensed the wall of nothingness in front of you. This wall of nothingness has formed a strong fortress. It has trapped my original body inside. You only need to break this wall of nothingness. Jianshan also looked ahead, but he still failed to discover anything. Even when he used the senses of his soul, he found nothing. It looks like it's impossible to sense this invisible wall without a certain level of strength, Jianshan thought. This invisible wall is only as tough as a medium-quality god artifact. With your original body strength, smashing through it won't be difficult at all. Why do you need me to do it? The solitary sword ancestor studied the invisible wall up ahead for a while and asked in doubt. It's not as simple as you imagine it to be. Do it. Mo Tianyun retreated far away with Jianshan, pulling very far away from the solitary sword ancestor. The solitary sword ancestor nodded slowly. In the next moment, an extremely powerful sword intent flooded out from his body. The simple sword on his back shone with dazzling light as well, illuminating the sky like a scorching sun. It dyed the dark space snow white. The solitary sword ancestor directly stabbed out with his sword. The strike was like a streak of light. It seemed to be able to pierce space itself, striking the invisible wall up ahead with chilling power. That's the power of the major achievement of Sword Profound. Take a good look. Mo Tianyun looked at the solitary sword ancestor and said to Jianshan softly. an expert of the laws of the sword at the major achievement of Sword Profound. Jianshun was greatly shocked when he heard that. He stared at the old man up ahead and asked, Senior Mo Tianyan, who is this? He's the solitary sword ancestor who's hunting you down. However, he won't cause any more trouble for you in the future, Mo Tianyan said nonchalantly. At this moment, a deafening rumble suddenly rang out. Along with it, scorching flames surged out, filling the sky with a red glow. It illuminated the dark space there. The invisible wall had already been shattered by the solitary sword ancestor, but an eternal flame burned within the invisible wall. It seemed to be able to incinerate space, radiating with terrifying heat. The solitary sword ancestor's face changed when he saw the flames hidden in the invisible wall. He immediately became extremely stern, and he cried out, That's the flame Reverend's cleansing fire, only in cosmic formation. Have you been trapped by the flame, Reverend Grand Prime's cleansing fire, only in cosmic formation? That's right. This formation has already trapped me for several tens of thousand years. However, the person controlling the formation is not the flame Reverend, Mo Tianyan said. The solitary sword ancestor was stern. He stared deeply at the dazzling ball of light up ahead and said sternly, If it really was the flame Reverend, it would have been impossible for you to last until now. However, the cleansing fire only in cosmic formation is not something I can get through with my power. Leave the rest to us, said Mo Tianyan. He made an inviting gesture towards the solitary sword ancestor. Chapter 2291. Jinshin's heart skipped a beat when he heard the name Yinzun Grand Prime. He was not unfamiliar with the name. He was a vicious person who dared to attack sovereigns of the world who had reached Grand Exalt. When Jinshin was still in the lower world, he had seen an image he suspected to be the Inata Grand Prime when he first entered the 9th floor of the Inata Tower. He learned from her that after the Inata Grand Prime was heavily injured by the greatest expert of the Immortals world, the Nirvanic Immortal Exalt, she was ambushed by the Yinzun Grand Prime and her disciple, Taji. At that time, the Yinzun Grand Prime wanted to steal the Inata Grand Prime's comprehension of the laws of fire while she was heavily injured. However, the Yinzun underestimated the Inata Grand Prime in the end. Even when the Inata Grand Prime was heavily injured, she was still not someone the Yinzun could deal with. In the end, the Inata Grand Prime's disciple, Taji, was personally obliterated by the Inata Grand Prime. Even the Yinzun Grand Prime had his body destroyed by the Inata Grand Prime. Only his soul managed to escape. Even now, Jinshin was unsure whether the self-proclaimed Inata Grand Prime he saw in the projection of the heavenly palace of Bishing on the 9th floor of the Inata Tower was the real Inata Grand Prime or a manifestation of the artifact spirit of the Inata Tower. However, there was one thing he was certain about, which was that the Yinzun Grand Prime colluding with Taji to ambush the Inata Grand Prime was not false. Otherwise, as Taji's disciple, Su Ran would not have been implicated and hunted down by the divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bishing for several million years. Senior Mo Tianyan, is the Yinzun Grand Prime very powerful? Even his solitary sword ancestor fears him so much? Jinshin asked about the Yinzun Grand Prime. Mo Tianyan nodded. The Yinzun is indeed very powerful. He's one of the few peak experts in the Saint world. He's only a step away from becoming a Grand Exalt. But the Flame Sovereign sure is crazy. It's rumored that he dares to attack the Inata Grand Prime in order to take the final step with his laws of fire. The Inata Grand Prime's strength ranks in the top 3 among the 7 Grand Exalts of the Saints world. Even if Yinzun had taken that final step and become a Grand Exalt, it would still be impossible for him to obtain the comprehension of the laws of fire from the Inata Grand Prime, let alone the fact that Yinzun has yet to break through. After failing to deal with the Inata Grand Prime, the Flame Reverend Grand Prime extended his hand to the Ice Goddess Hall in an attempt to take the final step through the Ice Goddess. Jinshin's heart immediately sank when he heard up to there. He said sternly, "Looks like the person behind Empatian is the Flame Reverend Grand Prime." Mo Tianyan glanced at Jinshin deeply and said, I know you have a second sister called Changyang Mingyue on the Tian Yuan continent. If you have a way to contact her, tell her about this, just in case she returns to the Ice Goddess Hall rashly without enough strength and falls into a trap. Or you can get your sister to go to the Heavenly Palace of Bishing. In the past, the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing hunted down the flame Reverend Grand Prime across the entire world, shaking up the entire Saints world. Only when the flame Reverend Grand Prime went into hiding and the First Majesty was unable to find him did the hunt stop. Jianshan nodded. His heart became rather heavy. He secretly began to worry for Fairy Haoyue after so many years. He knew that it was impossible for his sister to go to the Heavenly Palace of Bishing to find the First Majesty, because he had already learned from Shui Yunlan that his sister had once come into conflict with the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing a very, very long time ago. If the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing learned about his sister's condition, it would already be extremely fortunate if she did not kick her when she was down, let alone help her. Let's do it. I can't find anyone else suitable for the Honglian cosmic formation aside from you, because there are some secrets that no one can learn about. Imo Tianyin took out a palm-sized formation disc as he said that. The formation disc was bronze in color and covered in extremely profound inscriptions. Every single one of the inscriptions contained the truths of the world, as if they were interwoven with the laws of the world. I'll envelop the surroundings with this formation disc so that your presence won't leak out when you fuse the swords, so the experts of the Saints' world won't be able to sense it. With a wave of his hand, Imo Tianyin projected the formation into outer space. He cast down a great formation to envelop the surroundings. He was extremely cautious. Jianchun approached the Honglian cosmic formation silently. At this moment, the sword spirits appeared above Jianchun's head. Master, have you really made up your mind? The sword spirits confirmed once again. At this moment, the two sword spirits were stern on their illusionary faces. They had already recovered quite a lot compared to when they were on the Tian Yuan continent. As their strength increased, the power of the fusion would obviously become greater as well. Naturally, there would be an even more powerful backlash. Even they did not know whether the current Jianshan could endure the backlash from the fusion of the two swords. I made up my mind. Ziying, Qing Suo, let's begin. Jianshan was determined. The sword spirits looked at each other and said nothing more. In the next moment, a powerful violet and azure light suddenly radiated from the sword spirits, turning into two illusionary swords that hovered above Jianshan's head. Powerful sword chi swept out in a vast manner, as if it had dyed the surrounding space into a domain of sword chi. The azulate swords did not possess a body right now, but the fusion of the twin swords was no different from not having a body. This was because the fusion was the fusion of the two sword spirits' powers, Ziying and Qing Sa. In reality, it was the origin energy of the two sword spirits, Supreme Yin Force and Supreme Yang Force. Chaos was divided into Yin and Yang, while Ziying and Qing Suo had evolved from a sliver of Supreme Yin Force and Supreme Yang Force respectively. If their powers fused together, chaos would reappear. Jianshan stood below the twin swords. He raised his hands high above his head and fused them into the illusionary swords. The chaotic Niden in his dantian circulated wildly as surging chaotic force constantly surged out. It filled Jianshan's entire body, pushing the defenses of the 13th layer of the chaotic body to the limit. Afterwards, he used his arms and his mind to control the origin energy of the twin swords to slowly approach each other. Imo Tianyun stood in the distance. He stared at Jianshan sternly as he fused the two swords. Finally, under Jianshan's efforts, the powers of the sword spirits had truly fused together. They had completely fused together, forming a completely new power. Chapter 2292. As soon as the chaotic force was formed, it surged into Jianshan's body. Immediately, Jianshan could not help but tremble violently. His face became sheet white in a single moment as blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. Even though Jianshan had reached the major achievement of the chaotic body, and his body was extremely tough, enough to endure a certain amount of chaotic force. His current chaotic body was still extremely weak before true chaotic force. Without any exaggeration, his 13th layer chaotic body was as fragile as an infant before true chaotic force. As a result, he only managed to last for a split second before he became heavily injured from the impact of the true chaotic force. His organs shattered, and they were reduced to dust at an unbelievable rate under the terrifying destructive force of the chaotic force. Jinshin's white robes, which symbolized his status as a radiant Saint Master, became blood red at a visible rate. In less than a few seconds, the robes had been dyed red with blood. At this moment, if one could see through Jinshin's clothes, they would be able to clearly discover that Jinshin's body was covered in cracks like porcelain. Crimson chaotic blood constantly gushed out from the wounds. True chaotic force was just too powerful and too terrifying. It possessed a brutal presence of destruction, completely surpassing all other powers in the world. In just a split second, it had completely shattered Jinshin's chaotic body, causing Jinshin to become heavily injured like never before. Mo Tianyun's heart sank when he saw Jinshin's current state. The power of the chaotic force had completely exceeded his expectations. Stop charging up. Hurry up and attack, or you'll probably die from the backlash of the fusion of the twin swords before you even have the time to launch a single attack. Mo Tianyun growled from afar. His voice was like thunder, causing the space there to hum. It was clearly transmitted to Jinshin's head. Jinshin's face twitched as pain filled his face. The light in his eyes flickered. Not only did his body endure the powerful backlash from the fusion of the twin swords, but even his soul suffered an extremely violent impact as well. The dizzying pain from his soul made Jinshin feel like his soul was about to be ripped to shreds. Ark! Suddenly, Jinshin bellowed out at the sky. Under the support of his great willpower, he used all the strength in his body to control the chaotic force with his raised arms. He swung it at the cosmic formation of the fire-purifying lotuses up ahead. The true chaotic force from the fusion of the twin swords turned into an illusionary sword chi in Jinshin's hands. It pulverized space and destroyed laws along the way as it slashed down at an indescribable speed. At that moment, the world withered away. Everything fell silent. Space was as fragile as tofu. The 3,000 ways all submitted. The chaotic force condensed between Jinshin's hands seemed to judge the world as it descended, destroying everything. It was unstoppable. During this process, the backlash Jinshin suffered reached a peak. His face became frighteningly pale as blood spurted from his 7 orifices. His entire body trembled violently as a layer of flesh vanished from his body at a visible rate. The chaotic force was just too brutal, and the backlash was just too powerful. Before the attack had even landed, a portion of Jinshin's body had already been reduced to nothingness by the chaotic force. Thud! At this moment, there was a clear sound. The chaotic force that had condensed between Jinshin's hands had finally struck the cosmic formation of the fire-purifying lotus. The cosmic formation of the fire-purifying lotus that was so powerful that even the solitary sword ancestor was powerless against was as fragile as a bubble before true chaotic force. It popped upon contact. A huge crack appeared in the cosmic formation of the fire-purifying red lotus easily. Through the crack, it was possible to see a ball of undying fire within the formation. It radiated with terrifying heat that was enough to incinerate space. It burned fiercely. At this moment, a black-robed, middle-aged man sat within the cosmic formation of purifying fire and Honglian. The middle-aged man was extremely powerful. Just the surging presence he gave off was enough to make outer space tremble and obliterate space. He sat in the middle of the inextinguishable flames. Above his head, there was a green leaf that was only 2 fingers wide floating. It sprinkled a layer of faint green light that enveloped him, blocking the raging inextinguishable flames outside. The black-robed, middle-aged man looked exactly the same as the Mo Tianyun that Jianshan was familiar with. He was Mo Tianyun's original body, who had been trapped here for several tens of thousands of years. Just when a crack appeared on the cosmic formation of purifying fire in Honglian, the black-robed Mo Tianyun suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, two bolts of lightning shot out from his eyes, causing the roaring, undying flames outside to twist slightly. At the same time, an extremely old man in linen robes sat in another region of the cosmic formation of purifying fire in Honglian. Unlike Mo Tianyun's original body, where Mo Tianyun's original body endured the burning of the undying flames at all times, there was no undying flames within 30 meters of the linen-robed old man. He could not feel any heat from the undying flames at all. As a result, the place where the old man sat was the only safe place in the cosmic formation of purifying fire in Honglian. Suddenly, the old man snapped open his eyes. He stared into the distance with an ugly expression and cried out, "The flame reverend's cosmic formation of purifying fire in Honglian has actually been destroyed." Who broke through the formation? As he said that, the old man struggled to stand up. However, as soon as he moved, black chains immediately appeared on him, binding him to the spot. The black chains were not tangible. Instead, they were condensed from extremely pure and powerful demonic aura. They seeped into the old man's body and completely restrained him. The old man's face became extremely sunken when he saw the black chains around him. The light in his eyes flickered a few times before he suddenly called out, "The person who broke through the formation, no matter who you are, please leave immediately and announce to the Saints' world that the Empyrean Demon Lord is a member of the Immortals' world and Demons' world. I don't care what kind of relationship you have with the Empyrean Demon Lord, but this is no small matter. Please remember where you stand. Do not associate yourself with the people of the Immortals' world and commit treason." If the other experts of the Saints' world had heard what the old man had said, they would probably have cut off all ties with Mo Tianyun when it came to their decisions, even if they were on good terms with Mo Tianyun. They might even directly announce the shocking news to the entire Saints' world so that everyone knew about it. Unfortunately, the old man had never thought that the person who destroyed the Honglian cosmic formation would not be an expert of the Saints' world. Instead, it would be someone like Mo Tianyun, someone from the Immortals' world, Jianshan. Saint of Grand Harmony, you've wasted your efforts. You won't have the chance to announce my secret to the Saints' world anymore. At this moment, Mo Tianyun's voice rang out. The black-robed Mo Tianyun's demonic aura surged around him. His aura was as vast as the starry sky. He strolled through the inextinguishable flames. Every step he took was an illusion, and every step he took was a world. It was as if he was walking through the cracks of space. The Honglian cosmic formation had been destroyed. Even though the flames still wreaked havoc inside, they were nowhere near as powerful as before. They could no longer trap Mo Tianyun, Empyrean Demon Lord. The flame reverend won't let you go. The old man, known as the Saint of Grand Harmony, glared at Mo Tianyun as he spoke through gritted teeth. He was filled with hatred. The flame reverend has hidden himself, so how can he show himself? Moreover, my bloodline isn't much weaker than the warring gods of your Saints' world. Even if the flame reverend really does come, I don't have to fear him, Mo Tianyun said before directly throwing a palm strike at the Saint of Grand Harmony's head. The Saint of Grand Harmony was trapped, so he could not fight back at all. His head was smashed to pieces immediately, and his soul was forcefully sucked out by Mo Tianyun, trapped in his hand. The Saint of Grand Harmony's soul was extremely extraordinary as well. It shone with resplendent light like a miniature sun. Chapter 2293. At the same time, a meteor that was extremely distant from the desolate plain hovered in the sea of stars silently. Gazing at the desolate plain from the meteor, one would discover that the colossal piece of land had shrunk to the size of a fingernail. A man in azure robes sat on the desolate meteor. His face was cold, and his eyes were as sharp as swords. He stared at the floating piece of land in the distance without moving at all. He was the Azure Pung King. In the past few days, the Azure Pung King had never left. He remained on the meteor, silently watching the desolate plain. He kept an eye on Jianshan at all times, going as far as to lower himself just to keep an eye on Jianshan. Now, dealing with Jianshan was no longer as simple as Mo Cheng's death. His main objective was Jianshan's Anita Tower. Celestial Sword Saint, I, the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance, will remember this. You better not let me find an opportunity in the future, or, The Azure Pung King gritted his teeth as heavy killing intent flashed through his sharp eyes. Afterwards, the Azure Pung King opened his hand, and a droplet of blood hovered above it. It gave off powerful pulses of energy, but to an expert like the Azure Pung King, the pulses of energy were extremely weak. The droplet of blood came from Jianshan's chaotic blood. The Azure Pung King used the droplet of chaotic blood to use a secret technique again to search for Jianshan's whereabouts. He had already done this many times. In reality, he would basically use the droplet of blood to search for Jianshan's location every day or two in order to prevent Jianshan from leaving the desolate plain through teleportation formations. However, the Azure Pung King's face changed drastically this time. His eyes shone brightly as he became overjoyed. He suddenly stood up and said sternly, "Just as I expected, you can't stay on the desolate plain for long. You finally left. However, I have a droplet of your blood. No matter where you go, you won't be able to escape from me as long as you're still in the Saint's world. Jianshan, if you remained on the desolate plain, I really wouldn't be able to do anything to you, but you just happen to have left. You're just looking to die." The Azure Pung King sneered before closing his eyes. He used a secret technique to expand his search range. Very soon, the Azure Pung King opened his eyes. He gazed into the depths of space and sneered. "You sure have fled far away. However, no matter how far away you are, you won't be able to avoid the search of my secret technique, nor will you be able to escape from my pursuit." With a flash of azure light, the Azure Pung King had already turned into a streak of dazzling azure light. Vaguely, an Azure Pung seemed to soar into the sky, flying towards the depths of outer space with indescribable speed. He vanished in a single instance. At this moment, Jianshan bled from the fusion of the twin swords outside the cosmic formation of the purifying fire Honglian in an extremely well-hidden miniature world. He had suffered extremely heavy injuries from the backlash. Most importantly, Jianshan discovered that once the azulate swords fused, the two powers seemed to become two magnets, sticking to each other firmly. Separating them was not an easy task. After unleashing that attack, he clearly did not have much energy left. At this moment, he was like a lamp without oil. Therefore, separating the two swords was an extremely difficult challenge for him. It was also a race between life and death. This was because if he did not dispel the fusion of the twin swords, there would only be one outcome in the end, which was to die from the backlash like the previous master of the twin swords. This was definitely not something Jianshan wanted to see. Zing Qing Sua. Jianshan called out to the sword spirits inside. He had no idea whether the sword spirits could hear him or not. At the same time, a vicious light appeared in his eyes. Gritting his teeth, he ignited the power of his soul without any hesitation, erupting with the last of his strength to separate the twin swords. During this process, his organs had all vanished. They had been reduced to indiscernible powder under the impact of true chaotic force. Even a third of his flesh had melted away. The power of his soul rapidly depleted as well. He was on the brink of exhaustion. Jianshan was now on the brink of death. However, at this moment, something even worse happened. The evil power that had always been hidden in Jianshan's soul awakened from its slumber when Jianshan's soul was weakened. It wanted to suppress Jianshan's consciousness and take control of his body. Jianshan's heart sank. If he was suppressed by the evil power at such a crucial moment and was replaced by it, only death would await him. There would be no chance for him to survive. A demonic red light flickered in Jianshan's eyes. The world he saw gradually became blood red, which made him roar out furiously. He hated the evil power in his soul to the core. Whenever his soul was unable to hold on, The evil power would take advantage of the opportunity to cause trouble and replace him. If you really replace me at a time like this, I definitely won't be able to escape death. Since you want me to die, I'll make you die before me. Jianshin roared out. The demonic red light flickered more and more brightly in his eyes. Before he lost consciousness, he controlled a strand of chaotic force to directly slash at his soul. Jinshin's consciousness had already been affected. Although he still retained a sliver of clarity, he was already half mad. Otherwise, he would never have done something so crazy. After all, the chaotic force he controlled right now was true chaotic force that he could not control at all. It was extremely powerful. If he used it to slash at his soul, he would basically die. However, Jinshin still did it without any hesitation when he was on the verge of losing his mind. He did it firmly and decisively, without any hesitation at all. A strand of chaotic force directly cut into Jinshin's soul like a dagger, slashing at the evil power that had fused with Jinshin's soul. Immediately, Jinshin's soul was cut in half like a piece of paper. Coincidentally, one half of the soul just happened to be contaminated by the evil power, while the other half was Jinshin's normal soul. At this moment, the twin swords finally separated. With the fusion of the swords dispelled, the rampaging chaotic force vanished in a single moment as well, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Jinshin, on the other hand, was reduced to a bloody mess. He directly fainted in the air, losing consciousness. Mo Tianyun, who had been waiting in the distance, arrived before Jinshin in a flash when he saw this. Without any hesitation, he either applied the various healing pills and extremely precious heavenly resources that he had prepared beforehand on Jinshin's body or directly fed him. I never thought that the backlash from the fusion of the swords would be so powerful. The sword spirits haven't recovered to their peak, so the chaotic force created after the fusion isn't at its strongest either. However, even with that being the case, Jinshin still can endure it with his chaotic body. Mo Tianyun sternly inspected Jinshin's wounds. He was stern. His primordial spirit actually shattered. Suddenly, Mo Tianyun's face changed slightly. He murmured, "Why is it so severe? It looks like the fusion of the swords is actually harming him. We need to use the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul. That's the only way to recover his soul as quickly as possible." In the eyes of many experts in the Saint's world, an injured soul was an extremely troublesome matter. It was very difficult to deal with. However, looking at Mo Tianyun's current expression, he did not seem to be worried at all. In fact, he seemed to be very confident. In the next moment, Mo Tianyun's original body emerged from the purifying fire Honglian's cosmic formation. He still held the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul in his hand. The soul was like a miniature sun. It shone brightly, illuminating the surrounding space. However, the light did not last for very long before it was swallowed by a surging demonic aura. An extremely powerful, surging, and pure demonic aura surged out from Mo Tianyun's hand, forming black, demonic flames that enveloped the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul. Immediately, the Saint of Grand Harmony's miserable cries rang out from the black flames. At this moment, he seemed to be undergoing inhuman torture, the most intense torture in the world. The black-robed Mo Tianyun stared at Jinshin coldly. He studied him closely. Gradually, his brows furrowed more and more. His original body was here, so he could see much more clearly than his clone. He could see everything about Jinshin. Only now did he discover that Jinshin's wounds were much more severe than he had imagined them to be. There's actually a sliver of chaotic force remaining in the two halves of his soul. Now, the chaotic force is destroying his soul. His soul is growing weaker and weaker. If this is allowed to continue, he'll probably be obliterated. However, why is there the power of an evil spirit in the other half of his soul? The black-robed Mo Tianyun growled, as he said that the demonic flames in his hand swelled as well. He said sternly, "I need to refine the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul as soon as possible." At the same time, his clone took out a pure soul from his space ring and shot it into Jinshin's forehead. Chapter 2294. As soon as the pure soul entered Jinshan's soul, it immediately melted away, turning into an extremely pure and powerful power of the soul. It surged into Jinshan's shattered soul, rapidly repairing Jinshan's damaged soul. This pure soul was originally used to strengthen a martial artist's primordial spirit, making the martial artist's primordial spirit stronger. However, Jinshan's soul was heavily injured right now, so the pure soul could not strengthen Jinshan's soul. It could only be used to replenish the power of Jinshan's soul. With the pure soul as the master, the rate at which Jinshan's soul was destroyed by the chaotic force immediately slowed down. The black-robed Emo Tianyun stood beside Jinshan. He refined the saint of grand harmony's soul as he paid attention to the situation within Jinshan's body. Even though the pure soul had slowed down the rate at which Jinshan's soul dispersed, Emo Tianyun remained stern. Although we've made some time for him, the danger is still there. If we don't find a way to eliminate the remaining strand of chaotic force in his soul, he'll still die in the end, Emo Tianyun said with a deep voice. Although he could temporarily preserve Jinshan's soul, there was nothing he could do about the strand of chaotic force. This was because this was a strand of true chaotic force. It was not as easy to deal with as the half-baked chaotic force cultivated by those with a chaotic body. Moreover, the chaotic force was located in the weakest part of the soul. Now, he can only rely on himself. The only thing I can do is maintain his soul as best as I can, Emo Tianyun said softly before pouring another pure soul into Jinshan's soul. And I don't have a lot of pure souls left on me. They're not of very high quality either. I can only place my hopes on the Saint of Grand Harmony now. It looks like I need to refine the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul as hard as I can. The black-robed Emo Tianyun's eyes narrowed. He took out 2 pure souls and passed them to his clone. His original body sat in the air as he formed seals with his hands. Using space as a plate, he cast down a huge formation in an extremely short amount of time. The formation was extremely large. It filled the entire miniature world, basically filling it up. Every single inscription was extremely thick and flickered with black light as demonic flames surged within them. The black-robed Emo Tianyun was sitting cross-legged in the center of the formation. Countless formation patterns were intersecting with him. Waves of boiling demonic flames were circulating through the formation patterns and gathered on the black-robed Emo Tianyun's body, burning fiercely. Immediately, Emo Tianyun's entire body became enveloped by tremendous black flames. However, he did not move at all. He constantly used secret techniques, borrowing the power of the formation to refine the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul. As Emo Tianyun refined the soul, an overwhelming power seemed to wreak havoc in the miniature world. It caused the tough space that even the solitary sword ancestor had praised to distort violently. Time passed silently. Very soon, all of the pure souls on Emo Tianyun had been used up. They had all been channeled into Jinshan's soul. Even though he still had some heavenly resources and pills that targeted souls, their effects were nowhere near as effective as pure souls. I haven't refined the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul completely, but I can't care about that right now. The black-robed Emo Tianyun's sigh rang out from the demonic flames. The demonic flames in the air suddenly vanished, revealing Emo Tianyun's original body. In his hand, the soul that belonged to the Saint of Grand Harmony had already become a ball of extremely powerful soul power. However, there were some impurities in the power of the origin spirit, which made the power of the origin spirit appear far less pure than the pure soul. I hope the power of the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul can assist you in eliminating the strand of chaotic force in your soul. The black-robed Emo Tianyun stared at the unconscious Jinshan. He extended a finger, and a strand of pure soul as thick as a strand of hair immediately separated from the soul power in his hand. It began to pour into Jinshan's forehead. The power of the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul was just a little too powerful for Jinshan. As a result, Emo Tianyun did not pour all of it into Jinshan's soul at once. Instead, he poured it in bit by bit. At this moment, Jinshan felt like he had fallen into a dream. In the dream, he was extremely weak, so weak that he did not even have the strength to stand up. Around him was a boundless ocean. He drifted along with the surging waves, almost being swallowed by the waves many times. He was unwilling to die like this at the bottom of the sea. As a result, a powerful will to live appeared from the depths of his soul, allowing him to struggle as hard as he could even when he was in an extremely weak state. He wanted to survive in this hopeless situation. During this period, there were a few times when a surge of energy from an unknown source poured into his body, giving him strength. However, in front of this vast ocean, this energy was still very weak. It was not enough for him to break free. Gradually, his strength became weaker and weaker. In front of the terrifying waves formed by the vast ocean, he became more and more unable to endure. It seemed like he would be completely swallowed before long. However, even when he was in such dire straits, Jianshun did not become dejected at all. He did not show any fear towards death either. All he had was a tenacious will that emerged from the depths of his subconsciousness, allowing him to hold on bitterly. It was like his subconscious was telling him that he would not die, at least not here. At this moment, a tremendous, continuous, and seemingly endless power suddenly surged in. At that moment, Jianshun felt like he was brimming with power. As a result, he swam as hard as he could in the ocean without any hesitation. He did not know where the shore was, nor did he know when he would reach the end. He also did not know how long he could last, because at this moment, he did not have much ability to think on his own. All of his actions were based on instinct. He swam further and further away, but his strength never ran out. After who knew how long, he suddenly experienced a strange feeling. It was as if the region he swam past had become a part of his body. He had a vague sense of that region, as well as control over it. At this moment, he suddenly discovered that he seemed to have turned into a small portion of the ocean before he knew it. He did not stop there. He continued to swim forwards. He was like a pioneer of a territory. Wherever he went, the surrounding region seemed to have become his territory. P.S. There is still a second chapter. It is estimated to be released in the wee hours of the morning. Also, Shui Yunlan's image has already been posted on the public account. Even the image of Mo Tianyun, the mysterious character who basically appeared throughout the entire novel, will be posted on the public account in a few days. If you want to see it, you can follow Xiaoyao's public account on WeChat, Xingxixiao110. Chapter 2295. Finally, when he possessed half of the vast ocean, Jianshun suddenly shuddered in this strange state. Countless memories surged through him, allowing him to regain consciousness in a single instance. He remembered everything. This is true chaotic force. Jianshun immediately understood. This was no ocean. It was clearly the strand of true chaotic force that had remained in his soul, the strand of true chaotic force that had almost wiped out his soul. Senior Mo Tianyun, save me. After regaining consciousness, Jianshun immediately sensed the changes in the outside world. He also sensed an extremely powerful power of the soul pouring into his soul from Mo Tianyun's hand. It was exactly because of this power that his soul possessed the power to contend with chaotic force. At the same time, Jianshun sensed the other half of his soul. Most of the other half had been taken over by the evil power. There was also a strand of true chaotic force in there. However, his control over the other half of his soul did not seem to be as great anymore. It felt like he was gradually losing control over the other half of his soul. However, Jianshun's crisis had not been truly resolved yet. He did not have the spare time to pay attention to the other half of his soul. He immediately dismissed his thoughts and focused on dealing with the strand of chaotic force in his soul. A small portion of chaotic force has actually fused with my soul. Only now did Jianshun discover that his soul was different from before. A small strand of chaotic force had actually fused with his soul in an unbelievable manner. As a result, even though his soul was still very weak right now, it was much stronger and of a much higher level than before. If his soul before could be compared to a boulder, his soul, after fusing with the strand of chaotic force, had become a piece of steel. It had undergone a qualitative leap in strength. Jianshun was both surprised and overjoyed by this discovery, but he also felt some worry. He did not know if there would be any side effects or hidden problems after fusing with the chaotic force, but he could clearly sense the strengthening of his soul. Whatever. I have no other choice now anyway. Since the power of my soul has fused with a portion of true chaotic force, I might as well refine the remaining chaotic force as well. Jianshun thought. Afterwards, he made up his mind and began to forcefully fuse with the other portion of chaotic force. During the process of fusing, the power of Jianshun's soul was depleted at an extremely rapid rate. With his own abilities, he definitely would not have been able to achieve this because he did not have a soul that was powerful enough. Fortunately, he had Mo Tianyun by his side. Mo Tianyun controlled the power of the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul and channeled it into Jianshun's soul, providing enough backup for Jianshun. This was why Jianshun was able to achieve what he did. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. His soul has actually fused with a strand of chaotic force. That's just unbelievable, said Jianshun. The black-robed Mo Tianyun stared at Jianshun. What was happening to Jianshun left him astounded. The soul is the weakest thing. Once it comes into contact with chaotic force, it's almost certain death. Even if you manage to survive, you'll have to pay an unimaginable price. As for fusing with chaotic force, that's even more nonsense, because even Grand Exalts can't do it. Yet, Jianshun had done it right now. This child really is extraordinary. It looks like the sword spirits didn't choose him for no reason. Mo Tianyun stared deeply at Jianshun as he thought to himself. After regaining consciousness, Jianshun's battle against the chaotic force had gone from being unable to withstand a single strike to gradually gaining the upper hand. The remaining chaotic force in his soul was constantly being devoured, refined, and fused with by his soul, causing his soul to change in an unknown direction bit by bit. The power of the soul that's poured in from the outside isn't extremely pure. There are some impurities in it. If I don't find a way to deal with them and let the impurities fuse with my soul, it won't be good for me. With a thought, Jianshun suddenly thought of the other half of his soul that had been taken over by the evil power. He immediately separated the impure power and let the other half of his soul absorb it. The other half of his soul had already been contaminated by the evil power anyway, so it did not matter if it was contaminated again. In short, he could not allow the pure half of his soul to become unsafe. Time passed silently. After who knew how long, Jianshun finally opened his eyes. One of his eyes was blood red, flickering with a demonic red light. An evil power was brewing within it, while the other eye was of normal color. Thank you for saving me, Senior. Jianshun stood up in the air and bowed towards Mo Tianyun. However, in the next moment, his body began to spasm uncontrollably, and his face immediately paled. Only now did he realize that although he had managed to survive and his soul had not been destroyed, his body was extremely heavily injured. Every movement of his affected his wounds, causing him to feel heart-wrenching pain. Although Mo Tianyun had healed his body, he had only stabilized his wounds. He was nowhere close to making a full recovery. The black-robed Mo Tianyun stared at Jianshun. His gaze that seemed to be able to pierce through space seemed to see through Jianshun completely. He said, "What's going on with your soul? Your Yuan spirit has been sliced into two, so you should have already died. However, you're still able to act as if nothing has happened. I've never seen or heard of such a scene in my entire life." Jianshun shook his head. "I don't know what's going on either. None of this is under my control. However, my control over the other half of my soul has become weaker and weaker." Mo Tianyun nodded. He stared at Jianshun and only said after a moment of silence, "I boast that I have some achievements in the study of the soul, but what happened to you has already exceeded the scope of my understanding. As a result, I can't help you. However, the other half of your soul has been heavily contaminated. You need to give it up or use that soul to refine a clone. However, your control over the other half of your soul is becoming weaker and weaker. This is not a good thing. You need to find a way to resolve this. Junior understands." Jianshun clasped his fist. He glanced at the white-robed Emotianyun and the black-robed Emotanyun with a strange expression. This was because he had suddenly discovered that whether it was the white-robed Emotanyun or the black-robed Emotanyun, he could vaguely sense their strength. He did not know the exact cultivation level of Emotanyun's original body and clone. He could only sense that both Emotanyun's original body and clone were mountainous existences in his eyes. They were so powerful that they were undefeatable. In particular, the strength of Emotanyun's original body made Jianshan feel fear. I never thought that my soul would gain such an ability after fusing with chaotic force. However, I can sense that the changes to my soul are definitely not limited to this. I need to spend some more time studying it, Jianshan thought. He was secretly overjoyed. With this ability, no one would be able to hide their cultivation before him in the future. Suddenly, the space in the distance cracked open. A huge spatial crack appeared, and with a flash of azure light, a middle-aged man in azure robes appeared near the spatial crack. The Azure Pung King. Jinshin's face changed when he saw the azure-robed man. In the past, he could only sense the Azure Pung King's strength from his presence. He had no idea just how powerful the Azure Pung King was. However, he could clearly sense the Azure Pung King's strength now. Although he did not know what heavenly layer the Azure Pung King was at, the Azure Pung King's strength still shocked him. Chapter 2296. In Jinshin's eyes, the Azure Pung King's strength was an insurmountable mountain. With his current strength, he could not fight back at all. As a matter of fact, he could not even flee. However, Jinshin seemed extremely composed now that the Azure Pung King had arrived. He glanced at the black-robed Emotanyun beside him and knew extremely well that Emotanyun's original body was much more powerful than the Azure Pung King. On the other side, the Azure Pung King immediately discovered Jianshan as soon as he entered the miniature world. He could not help but become excited. However, this excitement only lasted for a split second before suddenly freezing up. Clearly, he had discovered Emotanyun as well. He did not pay any attention to Emotanyun. Instead, he suddenly looked at the black-robed Emotanyun beside Jianshan. He immediately became stern. He could sense an extremely great threat from the black-robed Emotanyun. He could not help but shiver from the bottom of his heart. Although he could not tell what level of cultivation Emotanyun possessed, he felt that Emotanyun was even more terrifying than when he faced the Celestial Sword Saint. Could this be his true body? The Azure Pung King was secretly surprised. Originally, he wanted to charge up and kill Jianshan, but he forcefully suppressed that urge. He clasped his fist at the black-robed Emotanyun and was about to say something. However, at this moment, a surging demonic aura suddenly erupted. The black-robed Emotanyun had already taken action. Boundless demonic aura surged out from his body, condensing into a huge demonic head. It opened its mouth and lunged towards the Azure Pung King. Immediately, space shook violently. The extraordinarily tough miniature world became riddled with cracks from Emotanyun's attack. Jianshan, who stood beside Emotanyun, felt like his entire body had become immobilized the moment Emotanyun struck out. It was as if an invisible force had trapped him there. He knew that this was not because Emotanyun was targeting him, but because Emotanyun's attack was too powerful. The terrifying energy compressed the void and affected this part of the world, causing the compressed space to form a kind of restriction on him. Jianshan was shocked. Only when Emotanyun struck out did he truly sense just how powerful Emotanyun was. The Azure Pung King's face changed drastically. His eyes narrowed to the size of needles in a single moment as an extremely bright azure light shone from his body. Bathed in the azure light, the Azure Pung King immediately turned into an Azure Pung that was only 10 meters long. The Azure Pung King did not choose to receive the demonic head condensed from demonic aura head-on. Instead, he flapped his wings violently and turned into an azure streak of light, dodging it by a hair's breadth with extreme speed. However, what made the Azure Pung King frown was that the demonic head condensed from demonic aura also made a turn and continued to pursue him. "Sir, what's the meaning of this?" The Azure Pung King called out sternly. He knew that Mo Tianyun's attack was no small matter, so he did not dare to receive it forcefully. Instead, he used his advantage, pushing his speed to the limit and dodging nimbly. "You sure are bold to have chased me all the way here," the black-robed Mo Tianyun said coldly. He stared at the Azure Pung King emotionlessly and reached out with his right hand. Immediately, powerful force of slaughter condensed, turning into a spear. It shot out with extremely terrifying laws of slaughter towards the Azure Pung King. The spear, completely condensed from the laws of slaughter, pierced through space as soon as it was shot out, breaking through space and time. It arrived before the Azure Pung King in a single instance, completely unaffected by distance. The Azure Pung King's face suddenly changed. In that critical moment, his wings immediately turned into a shield before him. Every single feather on his wings flickered with dazzling light as they gave off terrifying pulses of energy. Spurt. However, the spear condensed from the laws of slaughter pierced the Azure Pung King's wings with ease. Afterwards, it passed through his body without slowing down at all, leaving behind a smear of his blood. The Azure Pung King grunted. In the next moment, he suddenly vanished, having left the miniature world as quickly as he could. He used his speed to flee into the distance as a streak of azure light. In just a short moment, he had charged into the depths of outer space. Meanwhile, the black-robed Mo Tianyun took advantage of the opportunity to pursue and attack. The demonic aura around his body surged, and the boundless demonic aura condensed into a black rainbow bridge beneath his feet. The other end of the rainbow bridge extended endlessly all the way to the deepest part of the universe. In the next moment, he stepped onto the bridge and vanished in a single instance. Senior Mo Tianyun's strength has actually reached such a level where even the Azure Pung King is unable to withstand a single blow from him. Jianshin was extremely shocked after personally witnessing this. It was an extremely heavy blow to him. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance is known for being difficult to deal with in the Saints world. Since you become his target, you have to be careful in the future because once he sets his eyes on someone, he won't give up so easily unless they're so powerful that he can't do anything about them, Mo Tianyun said to Jianshin sternly. If that's the case, Senior Mo Tianyun, aren't you afraid that the Azure Pung King will cause some trouble for you in the future by attacking him? Jianshin asked in worry. Mo Tianyun chuckled when he heard that. I'll have nothing to worry about in the Saints world very soon. What trouble can he cause me? Moreover, the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance doesn't have the strength to deal with me. At this moment, the bridge condensed from boundless demonic chi appeared again. The black-robed Mo Tianyun had returned. He said, the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance's speed really is unrivaled. If he wanted to escape, I couldn't stop him. However, I've taken back the droplet of chaotic blood you left with him. As he said that, Mo Tianyun's original body passed a droplet of chaotic blood to Jianshin. He continued, the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance was able to find you every single time because of this droplet of blood. Now that it's returned to you, it won't be easy for him to find you again. Thank you, Senior Mo Tianyun. Jianshin clasped his hands in thanks and immediately stowed the droplet of chaotic blood away. At the same time, he became greatly relieved. He finally did not have to worry about the Azure Pung King finding him at all times. Once the Azure Pung King could not find him, the threat he posed would be drastically reduced. I'm going to the Cloud Plane immediately. This talisman can directly send you to the Radiant Saint Hall on the Desolate Plain. You'll have to travel the rest of the way yourself. Mo Tianyun passed a simple talisman to Jianshin. After a moment of hesitation, he took out a mask and said to Jianshin, this mask is a tool I used in the past. You can hide your identity very well with it. Even Grand Primes will struggle to see through you with a single glance. The news of you possessing the Inata Tower has already been leaked. Now, many experts are looking for you. They'll probably come to the Desolate Plain before long. Even the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bishing will personally move. Although this mask can't fool peak figures like the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing, it can fool the other grand primes. P.S. Changyang Mingyue's picture has been posted. To those who want to see it, please follow Xiaoyao's official account on WeChat, Xingxingxiao110. Chapter 2297. There are some pills that specialize in recovering the soul in this space ring, as well as various pills that can help with your wounds. You need to recover as soon as possible so that you can deal with the dangers that may appear in the future, as I won't be able to help you at all times in the future. Mo Tianyun passed another space ring to Jianshan before looking at the remaining half of the power of the Saint of Grand Harmony's soul in his hand. He said, I haven't refined the power of the soul completely. If you absorb too much of it, it will only lead to endless problems for you in the end. As a result, I'll take it with me for now. Once I refine it into a pure soul in the future, I'll give it to you as a form of compensation. Mo Tianyun warned Jianshan seriously. Afterwards, he did not stay any longer, leaving with his clone. In the blink of an eye, only Jianshan remained in the tough miniature world. Jianshan was in no hurry to leave. To him, this extremely well-hidden miniature world was a rare place of safety. It was not something the Radiant St. Hall could compare to. Jianshan stowed away the returning talisman carefully before sitting down in the air. He began to carefully observe every change to his body. Although my Yuan spirit is still extremely weak due to the depletion of the power of my Yuan spirit, its strength has increased by far too much. Moreover, after fusing with the chaotic force, I feel like my ability to sense the laws of the world has increased by a lot. I think it will be much easier for me to comprehend the laws of the world in the future. It's just that the evil power has taken over the other half of the soul is rather troublesome. The evil power has corrupted the other half of the soul first, and then I've poured in a large amount of memory fragments and impure power of the soul. As a result, the other half of the soul has become more and more chaotic. It's becoming more and more out of my control. Whatever. I'll think a way to deal with the other half of the soul later. The matter at hand is to recover, Jianshan thought before immediately opening the space ring Mo Tianyun had given him. Inside the space ring, there were indeed many bottles and jars containing various kinds of divine pills, as well as some neat and tidy heaven and earth treasures. Every heaven and earth treasure and bottle of pills were clearly labeled with their names and uses. They're actually all God-tier pills and heavenly resources. Jianshan was secretly surprised when he saw the grades of the pills and heavenly resources. Mo Tianyun really was extraordinarily wealthy. If the contents of the space ring were leaked, he had no doubt that many primordial realm experts would fight over it. Afterwards, Jianshan immediately began to consume healing pills and heavenly resources to recover. His injuries to his soul were the most severe. His soul had been split in half, which was equivalent to losing half of the power of his soul. It greatly affected his strength. As a result, the only way for him to recover the power of his soul in the shortest amount of time possible was through external items. The recovery speed of my physical body is actually much slower than before. Jianshan frowned slightly, but he eased up very soon. He could clearly sense that his chaotic body had clearly become even more powerful after being ravaged by true chaotic force. As a result, it healed much slower than before. After half a month, Jianshan's chaotic body finally recovered after ingesting many god-tier pills. Jianshan could clearly sense the toughness of his body now that his body had recovered to its peak condition. At that moment, he even had the misconception that his chaotic body had reached the 14th layer. However, at this moment, the half of Jianshan's soul that had been occupied by the evil power suddenly began to tremble violently. A powerful force of resistance radiated from it, wanting to break free from Jianshan's restraints. Jianshan's face suddenly changed. Before he could comprehend his strengthened chaotic body, he immediately gathered all his power to suppress the other half of his soul. This is my soul, yet it's actually resisting me. What's going on? Jianshan felt very confused as he suppressed it with all his strength. Not only was he unable to explain what was happening to him, But even the knowledgeable primordial realm experts in the saint's world would not be able to explain it. Jianshun immediately observed the other half of his soul carefully and attempted to invade it with his consciousness. However, the other half resisted him with all its might. Suddenly, Jianshun's mind shuddered. Disbelief filled his face as he cried out inside. The other half of my soul has actually developed a consciousness of its own. How is this possible? At that moment, the truth before him stunned Jianshun. He stared at the other half of his soul blankly. He found it very unbelievable and refused to accept it. That was his soul, a part of his soul, yet it had developed a consciousness of its own. This completely defied common sense and exceeded Jianshun's understanding. At this moment, the other half of the soul that was occupied by the evil power broke free from Jianshun's suppression and escaped from Jianshun's head. It charged into the miniature world as quickly as it could and vanished into the sea of stars. Oof, you're a part of my soul. Don't even think about escaping from me. Jianshun snorted coldly and directly pursued it. However, the completely blood-red soul that had been possessed by the evil power suddenly pulsed strangely before vanishing right before Jianshun's eyes. It had vanished without a trace. Jianshun was suddenly stunned. He stared where the other half of the soul had vanished with a sunken face. He remained silent for a very long time. Just how had the other half of the soul vanished right before his eyes? As its master, he had no idea at all. Everything that had happened before him made him understand that the other half of his soul that had been occupied by the evil power had undergone some incomprehensible change. Now, it had completely broken free from his control. I've actually lost half of my soul. Jianshun's face became very ugly. The other half of his soul was equivalent to half of his soul. Now, that half of his soul was no longer in his body. He felt like he was no longer complete. Most importantly, when the other half of his primordial spirit rushed out his body, he immediately felt waves of dizziness coming from his brain. Clearly, losing half of his origin spirit had a huge impact on him. One day I will find you. No matter what has happened to you, you will always be me, Jianshun said with a deep voice. With a flip of his hand, he took out a jade bottle and poured all the recovery pills into his mouth. Chapter 2298. The number of pills that Embark had left for Jianshun decreased with each passing day, while the wounds on Jianshun's soul healed at an extremely significant rate under the accumulation of so many pills. The remaining half of his soul basically strengthened with each passing day. The power of his soul that had been depleted was being replenished at an extremely rapid rate. After who knew how long, Jianshun, who had remained motionless like a statue in outer space, finally stopped healing. His tightly shut eyes slowly opened at that moment as well. However, the moment his eyes opened, they became incomparably deep. His pupils seemed to have become two black holes in the universe, so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. When one looked into his eyes, one would feel as if one's soul was being pulled in and lost in the boundless darkness. Jianshun failed to sense the change in his eyes earlier. What he sensed most clearly was that the world, and even the universe had become different in his eyes. Jianshun was unable to pinpoint exactly what was different. This was just a feeling he had after the strand of true chaotic force had fused with his soul. It was an indescribable feeling. It was extremely profound. Although the power of my soul has recovered, it's only half of what it was before. Unless I can find the other half of my soul, it'll be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Jianshun stood up in outer space. His eyes were deep as he stared into the depths of the vast universe. His expression was mixed. Now that the power of his soul had recovered, he could vaguely sense the other half of his soul. He could roughly sense where it was right now, and he could even sense that it was moving at high speeds. However, Jianshun also knew that the other half of his soul had given birth to a new consciousness. When he sensed its existence, it could sense his location as well. As a result, it was impossible for him to find the other half of his soul with his current strength. Ignoring the fact that the other half of his soul was already extremely far away from him, He believed that the other half would definitely flee as soon as it sensed him approaching. Sigh. Jianshan sighed gently. He ignored the other half of his soul and put on the mask that Emo Tanyan had left him. The mask was extremely extraordinary. As soon as he put it on, Jianshan immediately sensed a faint, mysterious power envelop him. The power was extremely difficult to sense. If it were not for the fact that his soul had changed after fusing with a strand of chaotic force, he probably would not have been able to sense the existence of the mysterious power. Jianshan changed the mask to Chang Yang's appearance. Afterwards, with a flip of his hand, he took out the simple talisman that Emo Tanyan had given him from his space ring. He activated the talisman and was taken away by its power. When Jianshan reappeared, he had already returned to his dwelling in the Radiant Saint Hall on the desolate plain. It just happened to be where he had left with Emo Tianyan. However, as soon as he returned to his dwelling, Jianshan frowned. The dwelling was completely different from when he had left. At this moment, the flat ground of this cave that he had simply set up was already filled with dirt and rocks. On the surrounding smooth cave walls, there were also many large and small, uneven holes and cracks. At this moment, his cave residence looked like a mess everywhere. It didn't look like a place where people lived at all. Even the simple formation he had set up at the entrance of the cave residence had been destroyed. Even half of the cave entrance had collapsed. Jianshan looked at his messy dwelling calmly. However, the coldness in his eyes revealed that he was not as calm as he seemed on the surface. This was his cave abode, the place where he cultivated in seclusion. In a sense, it was his home. Yet now, it had been destroyed to such a state. He was in a very bad mood. Jianshan made his way out of his dwelling silently. He did not use the senses of his soul, but his powerful senses allowed him to sense that Bai Yu was making her way towards his dwelling. Although Jianshan's soul was no longer complete, it had become much more powerful. Before he left, he had only been able to sense any changes in the mountain with the senses of his soul and find Han Xan, who was cultivating at the top of the mountain. But now, he no longer needed to use the senses of his soul. Just his powerful senses allowed him to clearly sense any changes in the mountain. As a matter of fact, he could directly sense Han Xion's location. Moreover, he could clearly sense that Han Xion's aura was very weak, and he had suffered serious injuries. He was currently recuperating in his cave abode at the top of the mountain. Ah, junior brother, you're back. Bai Yu flew over as milky white radiant saint force enveloped her. As soon as she arrived outside Jianshan's dwelling, she saw Jianshan standing outside with a single glance. She could not help but cry out immediately. Little junior sister, what happened in the days that I was away? And what's with the injuries on your body? Who injured you? Jianshan looked at Bai Yu and asked calmly. Junior brother, how can you tell that I'm injured? Bai Yu stared at Jianshan in surprise. She had already recovered over 90% of her wounds. They no longer affected her at all. She was confident that even her teacher, Han Xian, would not be able to tell with her current recovery. Yet now, her junior brother, who was even weaker than her, could tell with a single glance. This naturally surprised her. Tell me what happened first, Jianshan asked. Bai Yu's face became gloomy when she heard that. Her pretty face was filled with some grievances as she said, It's all because of the disciples of the Snowfall Peak. The Lord of our soaring clouds peak, teacher Han Xian, had some grievances with the Lord of the Snowfall Peak in the past. A few days ago, the Lord of the Snowfall Peak came to our soaring clouds peak to make trouble and injured our teacher Han Xian in a battle. After teacher Han Xian was injured, the disciples of the Snowfall Peak came to provoke our soaring clouds peak time and time again, challenging senior brother Zhuofeng and I. If we did not accept the challenge, the disciples of the Snowfall Peak would use various insults to insult us. Senior brother Zhuofeng and I could not take it anymore, so we could only accept the challenge. In the end, we were bullied by the disciples of the Snowfall Peak. Bai Yu's eyes became slightly red and swollen when she reached there. As soon as she thought about how the disciples of the Snowfall Peak had bullied her a few days ago, she felt wronged. After the disciples of the Snowfall Peak bullied me and senior brother, they still felt that it wasn't enough. They basically searched the entire mountain before they found Junior Brother's dwelling with great difficulty. They wanted to force you out, but fortunately, you weren't in the dwelling at the time. Otherwise, you probably would have ended up in an even worse state than Senior Brother. First, Senior Brother is very heavily injured. Even with his cultivation with a 3-colored soul core, he'll need a very long time to recover. Because I'm a woman, my injuries are lighter, Jianshan said. The Snowfall Peak. Jianshan stood there with his arms crossed as he listened to Bai Yu explain the entire situation. Coldness flashed through his eyes as he growled. How many of them are there? What's their strength? Chapter 2299. What's the cultivation of the second Senior Brother of the Snowfall Peak? Jianshan asked again. The second Senior Brother of the Snowfall Peak is the same as Senior Zhuofeng, having a 3-colored soul core. However, he's already touched upon the laws of the Hallowed, so he's slightly more powerful than Senior Zhuofeng, said Bai Yu. Jianshan nodded slightly. Radiant Saint Masters were very weak in battle. Even if they had grasped Radiant Arts, they would not be particularly powerful. A Radiant Saint Master with a 3-colored soul core was definitely not the opponent of a Hallowed Saint Master with a 2-colored soul core. Since the second Senior Brother of the Snowfall Peak had already touched upon the laws of the Hallowed, he was indeed not someone Zhuofeng could deal with. At this moment, Jianshan glanced at the foot of the mountain. He pointed in a direction and said, "They're the people of the Snowfall Peak?" Bai Yu was surprised when she heard that. She immediately looked in the direction Jianshan had pointed, and her face immediately changed drastically. She said with some panic, "It's them, it's them. The people of the Snowfall Peak have gone overboard. They've actually come again. Junior Brother, they've come to cause trouble. They specifically bully us because we're weaker than them. Hide quickly. Don't let them discover you. I'll go find first Senior Brother right now." Before she had even finished speaking, Bai Yu left in a hurry to find Zhuofeng. After Bai Yu's departure, Jianshan sat down on a rock nearby and actively released his presence. At this moment, 4 young men in white robes that represented Radiant Saint Masters stood at the foot of the mountain. They were enveloped by a layer of milky white light as they chatted and laughed along the way. They flew towards the top of the mountain at a steady pace. These 4 young men were the disciples of the Peak Master of Snowfall Peak. The person in the lead seemed to be around 25 or 26 years old. He was handsome and extraordinarily handsome. However, every time he glanced at the land that belonged to Soaring Cloud's peak, his expression would faintly reveal a hint of arrogance. The young man was the second Senior Brother of the Snowfall Peak, Wen Cheng. He was currently patrolling the Soaring Cloud's peak with his 3 junior brothers. It was as if they had already treated the Soaring Cloud's peak that belonged to Han Xin as their own territory. The 3 disciples of the Soaring Cloud's peak's guardian Han really aren't much. I heard that the one called Zhuofeng is even a 5-star genius, but in the end he couldn't even withstand a single blow from second Senior Brother. On the other hand, that Bai Yu's looks are truly extraordinary. No matter if it's her face or her figure, they can simply be described as perfect. In my opinion, such a peerless beauty should serve second Senior Brother. That's right. Second Senior Brother, with your identity and background, it won't be difficult for you to subdue Bai Yu. The 3 Senior and Junior Brothers of the Snowfall Peak followed behind Wen Cheng and kept flattering him, their mouths full of flattery. As for Wen Cheng, he seemed to enjoy being praised like this. An arrogant smile appeared on his face as he said confidently, "Don't worry, Bai Yu won't be able to escape from my grasp. She will submit to me sooner or later. A mere protector like Han Xin won't be able to protect Bai Yu." Wen Cheng spoke arrogantly. He did not take the protectors of the Radiant Saint Hall seriously at all. Of course, with second Senior Brother's background, even the elders who cultivate in the Sacred Hall wouldn't dare to offend you, let alone a mere protector of the Radiant Saint Hall. The 3 Senior Brothers behind Wen Cheng all said. Wen Cheng smiled indifferently. Just when he was about to say something, his eyes suddenly narrowed, and he suddenly looked in another direction. That direction was an extremely remote place on the Soaring Cloud's peak. Very few people set foot there. However, Wen Cheng stared in that direction instead. The light in his eyes flickered, and his lips gradually curled into a mysterious smile. He said, "It should be that person called Changyang. He was lucky last time. He had already hidden himself when we found his dwelling, so we failed to find him. However, I'd like to see where he'll hide this time." Changyang, that second senior brother of the Soaring Clouds Peak? Ha, let's go. Let's go check out this coward of the Soaring Clouds Peak. Luo Xiefeng's 4 disciples changed directions as they chatted. They directly flew towards Yin Chei's dwelling. Bai Yu, who had always been observing their movements, naturally sensed that the 4 of them were heading towards Jianshan's dwelling as soon as possible. This immediately made Bai Yu panic. She immediately rushed towards Zhuofeng's dwelling as quickly as she could. "First senior brother, this is bad. The people of the Snowfall Peak have come to our Soaring Clouds Peak again. They're heading towards Junior Brother's dwelling. First senior brother, let's go help Junior Brother," Bai Yu called out anxiously from outside Zhuofeng's dwelling. "Changyang, that coward who only knows how to hide, has returned." Zhuofeng's voice rang out from the dwelling. "First senior brother, you must have misunderstood. Junior Brother is definitely not that kind of person. Perhaps Junior Brother just happened to have some matters to attend to when the people of the Snowfall Peak came to make trouble last time." Bai Yu defended Jianshan. Zhuofeng snorted coldly. "Junior sister, you're far too naive. You can't judge a book by its cover. Don't be fooled by Changyang's appearance. Perhaps Changyang knows that our Soaring Clouds Peak is no match for the Snowfall Peak, so he used this opportunity to hide. Perhaps Changyang already expected something like this to happen the moment he joined our Soaring Clouds Peak, which is why he set up a dwelling in an extremely remote place so that he could have a backup plan. Junior sister, you should go back. I look down on someone as cowardly as Changyang from the bottom of my heart, let alone the fact that I don't have the ability to help him right now. Even if I did, I would never help someone like Changyang. Don't go to Changyang's dwelling anymore. This person has no right to be my junior brother, nor does he have the right to be your second senior brother. Forget about him. Just treat it as if he doesn't exist on our Soaring Clouds Peak." Zhuofeng's words were resolute and decisive, leaving no room for negotiation. "First senior brother, we're all from the same sect. How can you be so heartless? Whatever, if you don't want to go, I'll go," Bai Yu said angrily before turning around and leaving. At this moment, the 4 disciples of the Snowfall Peak, led by one Cheng, had already arrived near Jianshan's dwelling. They saw Jianshan seated on a rock with a single glance as he was enveloped by a pure, milky white light. He seemed to be cultivating. "This is Changyang? He's actually cultivating outside. The environment outside is extremely complicated. If he accidentally becomes frightened and suffers from cultivation deviation, he won't be able to blame anyone." Wen Cheng looked at Jianshan and sneered. Afterwards, he shot a glance at the people behind him. A radiant Saint Master with a one-colored soul core behind him understood. As he sniggered, he directly used a Radiant Arte, condensing a sword from Radiant Saint Force and shooting it at the rock Jianshan sat on. Boom! The rock that Jianshan sat on exploded, shattering into pieces with a boom. Wen Cheng and the other 3 all stared at Jianshan. They wanted to see whether Jianshan would suffer from cultivation deviation if he suddenly became frightened. At the very least, they wanted to see him suffer from the backlash of Radiant Saint Force and end up in a horrible state. The cultivation of Radiant Saint Masters was very different from fighters. They condensed the pure Radiant Saint Force origin energy in the world and fused it with the soul core in their heads. The head was where the soul resided. It was the weakest part of the soul, so it was extremely easy for the Radiant Saint Force in the soul core to go out of control and suffer from cultivation deviation if they were too shocked or stimulated during the process. P.S. The image of the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing has been posted. If you want to see it, please follow Xiaoyao's public account on WeChat, XingXingXiao110. Chapter 2300. However, to Wen Cheng and the others' disappointment, they did not see the outcome they wanted. Nearby, Jianshan did not fall to the ground because of the rock he sat on. He sat at the same height as the rock as he radiated with a sacred light. He was not affected at all. Even the dust that flew into the air was blocked by the layer of gentle light around Jianshan. It did not touch him at all. Wencheng immediately frowned when he saw this. The behavior of the second senior of the Soaring Clouds Peak seemed to be rather different from what he had imagined. At this moment, the radiant saint force around Jianshan gradually dispersed. He opened his eyes and looked at Wencheng and the others coldly. He said sternly, "Forcefully interfering with cultivation will lead to extremely severe consequences. In the saint world, no one would do something like that unless there is a blood feud. This is because forcefully interfering with someone else's cultivation will lead to enmity, even if there is no enmity. Moreover, it will be great enmity." Jianshan's voice was cold as he spoke forcefully. The Radiant Saint Master, who had smashed Jianshan's rock, sneered when he heard that. He said, "Really? Doesn't this mean that there's already a huge enmity between us?" The Radiant Saint Master was the 5th junior of the Snowfall Peak. He was the one who had joined the sect the latest and also possessed a one-colored soul core. However, he did not take Jianshan seriously at all. He said provocatively, "You must be the 2nd senior of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Changyang. But Changyang, there's already enmity between us now, and it's great enmity. What are you going to do about it?" Jianshan stood 20 meters away from Wencheng and the others with his hands behind his back. His white robes were spotless as he said emotionlessly, "Ever since I started cultivating, there have been many people who have become enemies with me due to various reasons, but many of them have already died. They died to my hands." Jianshan seemed calm, but there was a heavy coldness in his voice. Originally, he did not take the disciples of the Snowfall Peak too seriously, but Jianshan just happened to hear everything they said at the foot of the mountain. This was because Jianshan's soul had mutated. His senses had become unimaginably great. Nothing that happened on the Soaring Clouds Peak could escape his senses. Whether it was what Wencheng and the others had said, the conversation between Bai Yu and Zhuo Feng, or even Han Exine, who was healing in seclusion, he could clearly sense everything, including Wencheng. The 4 disciples of the Snowfall Peak were all stunned when they heard that. However, they were not frightened. After being stunned for a moment, they all began to laugh aloud. They all looked at Jianshan like they were looking at an idiot. I've seen arrogant people before, but I've never seen someone as arrogant as him. Where does a Radiant Saint Master with a mere one-colored soul core get the courage to say something like that? Where does he get the confidence to say something like that? Who does he think he is? Even second senior brother doesn't have the confidence to say something like that. He really is like a newborn calf that doesn't fear a tiger. I think his enemies in the past are all mortals who have never cultivated. With his strength as a Class 9, Radiant Saint Master, dealing with mortals is indeed a piece of cake. Haha. The disciples of the Snowfall Peak all mocked Jianshan. They were not afraid of Jianshan's threat at all. 5th junior brother, looks like you've accidentally offended someone who's not to be trifled with. The 2nd senior brother of the Snowfall Peak, Wencheng, stared at Jianshan in a mocking manner as he sniggered. The 5th junior brother of the Snowfall Peak sniggered as well. He said, "Looks like he really is a vicious person who's not to be trifled with. However, my greatest flaw is that I'm not afraid of trouble. As a result, the more difficult someone is to be trifled with, the more I want to trifle with them." With that, the 5th junior brother immediately controlled his Radiant Saint Force and arrived before Jianshan in a flash. His hand was enveloped by a layer of milky white light as he directly slapped at Jianshan's face. Slapping was the most extreme method of humiliation. Clearly, the 5th junior brother of the Snowfall Peak did not plan on saving any face for Jianshan. He used the most vicious method to humiliate Jianshan as soon as he struck out. Jianshan's eyes turned cold. He stood there without moving and raised his hand as well. His hand was enveloped by a layer of Radiant Saint Force as he swung it back at an even faster speed than the 5th junior brother of the Snowfall Peak. Slap! With a clear sound, before the 5th junior brother of the Snowfall Peak could even approach Jianshan, Jianshan's slap had already arrived. It struck his face firmly and sent him flying. Wencheng and the 3 other disciples became dumbfounded when they saw this. They stared blankly at their 5th junior brother who had been sent flying over a dozen meters away. None of them had returned to their senses. The 5th junior brother climbed up from the ground in an extremely horrible shape. His snow-white robes were covered in mud, while half of his face had been reduced to a bloody mess. All of his teeth had been shattered as he stared at Jianshan with bloodshot eyes. "Why, you coward! How dare you slap me? I'll kill you!" The fifth junior brother was infuriated. Great humiliation filled his chest, causing his gaze towards Jianshan to be filled with heavy killing intent. Afterwards, he charged towards Jianshan as if he had lost his mind. He used his radiant arts to attack Jianshan as hard as he could. Jianshan sneered. He also used his radiant arts to deal with the fifth junior brother. Even though the strength he displayed was also at the level of a one-colored soul core, his battle prowess had completely surpassed it. Even without using the laws of the Hallowed, he was not the opponent of the fifth junior brother of the Snowfall Peak. Slap! Another clear sound rang out. Jianshan had slapped the other half of the fifth junior brother's face, sending him flying again. The fifth junior brother of the Snowfall Peak cried out miserably. The slap was clearly even more powerful than the previous one. Not only had his face been reduced to a bloody mess, but his head had also become muddled. He became dizzy. "Stop! Changyang, how dare you!" Only now did Wen Cheng and the others return to their senses. They all became furious and bellowed out furiously. Two radiant Saint Masters directly charged towards Jianshan. "Don't you dare bully junior brother. This is the territory of our Soaring Clouds Peak, not your Snowfall Peak. If you dare to act recklessly, I'll get teacher to suppress you." At this moment, Baiyu hurried over from afar after hearing the disturbance. Before she had even arrived, she had already called out. Baiyu was extremely worried. She knew very well that Jianshan had only broken through to a one-colored soul core recently. His cultivation was at the very bottom among those with a one-colored soul core. Even the weakest among the disciples of the Snowfall Peak had a one-colored soul core longer than Jianshan. As a result, she naturally believed that if Jianshan came into conflict with them, the one who would suffer would definitely be Jianshan. The two radiant Saint Masters who charged towards Jianshan furiously to teach him a lesson forcefully came to a halt when they heard Baiyu's call. They were not afraid of being suppressed by Jianshan. Instead, they thought of a rule in the Radiant Saint Hall that prohibited stronger disciples from attacking weaker disciples. However, the two of them both had two-colored soul cores. If they attacked a disciple with a one-colored soul core, they would be breaking the rules of the Radiant Saint Hall. They would be severely punished. It was exactly because of this that the person who shattered Jianshan's boulder while he was cultivating was the weakest among them, their fifth junior brother, who also had a one-colored soul core. However, when the disciples of the Snowfall Peak looked at their fifth junior brother whose face had been beaten to the point of being unrecognizable and heard Baiyu's clamor, their expressions became extremely interesting. Baiyu arrived before Jianshan with lightning speed. She studied Jianshan in concern first, and only when she saw that Jianshan was fine did she let out a sigh of relief. Afterwards, she stood before Jianshan with her petite body and said, "Junior brother, don't be afraid. With me here, I definitely won't let them bully you. Changyang, I'll kill you." At this moment, the fifth junior brother of the Snowfall Peak climbed up from the ground in a daze. He managed to locate Jianshan with great difficulty, and he roared out furiously as he charged over with bloodshot eyes. However, as soon as he took a few steps, he felt the world around him spin. Afterwards, he staggered and fell to the ground. Baiyu, who had hurried over to protect Jianshan, became completely stunned as well when she saw her fifth junior brother's unrecognizable face. She had no idea what had happened. "Junior brother, what happened?" Baiyu pointed at the fifth junior brother of the Snowfall Peak and asked Jianshan, "What else can happen? A disciple of our Snowfall Peak has actually been injured like this by Changyang of your Soaring Clouds Peak. Your Soaring Clouds Peak needs to give us an explanation for this." The third disciple of the Snowfall Peak, Lian growled. His expression was extremely ugly. What did you say? Your Snowfall Peak's Lu Changbing was beaten to such a state by little junior brother? Baiyu was greatly shocked when she heard that. Her face was filled with disbelief. "Obviously. Is there anyone else here aside from Changyang?" Lian said coldly. He was arrogant, completely ignoring the Soaring Clouds Peak. Chapter 23:01. You should be called Lien Yen, right? The third disciple of the Snowfall Peak, Lien Yen. I formally challenge you now. Are you bold enough to accept? Jianshun called out. Jianshun's words immediately stunned everyone present. A radiant Saint Master who had just condensed a one-colored soul core was actually challenging a radiant Saint Master with a two-colored soul core? Moreover, the radiant Saint Master with a two-colored soul core was an expert who had broken through many years ago and had stabilized his cultivation long ago. Where did he get his confidence from? Junior brother, you can't. You just broke through recently. You haven't stabilized your one-colored soul core yet. You can't fight Lien Yen. Baiyu tried her best to dissuade Jianshun. After hesitating slightly, she whispered into Jianshun's ear, "This Lien Yen is very powerful. He's not someone Wen Changbing can compare to. Your senior sister failed to defeat Lien Yen with her two-colored soul core and was injured by him instead. Junior brother, listen to me. Don't come into conflict with Lien Yen no matter what. Since junior sister is injured by Lien Yen, there's even less reason for me to spare him. I'm still the second senior brother of the Soaring Clouds Peak after all," Jianshan said. "You're still talking nonsense, even at a time like this." Baiyu became angered when she heard Jianshan refer to her as junior sister. Jianshan, who was clearly weaker than her, had become her senior brother instead. She had always felt conflicted about this. "Lien Yen, I'll be waiting for you on the ring of the sky-gazing peak." Jianshan did not say anything more to Baiyu. After saying that to Lien Yen coldly, he directly flew towards the sky-gazing peak with a layer of light around him. The rules of the Radiant Saint Hall did not forbid disciples of the same level from sparring with one another. However, once stronger disciples attacked weaker disciples, they would be breaking the rules of the Radiant Saint Hall, so they would not be allowed to do so. Weaker disciples could challenge stronger disciples. How arrogant. Do you really think that you are qualified to fight me just because you defeated fifth junior brother? I'll accompany you to the arena and let you understand the strength of a two-color primal core. It is not something your mere one-colored primal core can compare to. The Snowfall Peaks. Lien Yen sneered as he followed closely behind Jianshan. The Radiant Saint Hall possessed countless mountains. All hallowed Saint Masters who had reached the level of the Divine King would be given a mountain as their territory and become protectors of the Radiant Saint Hall. However, there were also differences in size among these thousands of mountains. The Flying Clouds Peak that Jianshan was on and the Falling Snow Peak that they were in conflict with belonged to the type that was unremarkable among these thousands of mountains. The Sky-Gazing Peak was one of the 99 main peaks of the Radiant Saint Hall. Including the Flying Clouds Peak and the Falling Snow Peak, it dominated close to 100 mountains in the surroundings. The Sky-Gazing Peak was not as quiet as the Flying Clouds Peak. Only Han Xan, Jianshan, and the other two disciples resided on the huge peak. As one of the 99 main peaks, the Sky-Gazing Peak was a place where business and entertainment could be found. As a result, it was extremely busy. Many Radiant Saint Masters from various mountains moved around the Sky-Gazing Peak, while the huge square was filled with people. Jianshan had already understood all the rules of the Radiant Saint Hall, so as soon as he arrived on the Sky-Gazing Peak, he directly made his way to one of the arenas with great familiarity. He stood on it leisurely and called out, "Disciple Changyang of the Flying Clouds Peak with a one-colored soul core challenges Disciple Lien Yen of the Falling Snow Peak with a two-colored soul core." What? A one-colored soul core challenge a two-colored soul core? That's rare. The difference between a one-colored soul core and a two-colored soul core is equivalent to the difference between receival and returnants. That's an entire major realm of cultivation. Where does this person's confidence come from? Is he a 7-star genius or above? If he's a 7-star genius, he really does have the ability to defeat a two-colored soul core with a one-colored soul core. Jianshan's call attracted quite a few people. Immediately, many Radiant Saint Masters gathered from all directions. They all looked at Jianshan in surprise. These Radiant Saint Masters were all rather weak. Most of them had one-colored soul cores or two-colored soul cores. Very few people paid any attention to those with three-colored soul cores. As a result, when Lien Yen of the Falling Snow Peak arrived, Over 100 Radiant Saint Masters from various peaks had already gathered around the arena. Lien Yan's face became rather sunken when he saw Jianshan standing leisurely and the Radiant Saint Masters gathered around the arena. Now, he seemed to understand Jianshan's intentions. Even if he defeated Jianshan before everyone on the arena, he would not feel any sense of glory. After all, it was reasonable for a Radiant Saint Master with a 2-colored soul core to defeat a Radiant Saint Master with a 1-colored soul core. But on the other hand, if he were to be defeated, what he would receive would not be as simple as a single defeat. Junior brother, you have to be careful. Bai Yu had arrived as well. She called out in concern from below the arena. Who's Lien Yan? Get on the arena and defeat him. You can't lose to a disciple with a 1-colored soul core with your 2-colored soul core, or you'll really be humiliated. At the same time, a few Radiant Saint Masters called out excitedly from the surroundings. Lien Yan snorted coldly. He looked at Jianshan like a venomous snake. He sneered and leapt onto the arena as well. Not only will I win this battle beautifully, but I'll also make Chang Yang pay a heavy price. I'll make him pay 10 times the humiliation fifth junior brother has suffered. Lien Yan made up his mind. Lien Yan secretly made up his mind. He stared at Jianshan coldly and said, Chang Yang, do it. Let me see what you're capable of. A strange smile appeared on Jianshan's face when he heard that. He did not waste any more words. He condensed a sword from Radiant Saint Force and shot it at Lien Yan. That's a basic Radiant Arte, the Radiant Sword. You're dreaming if you want to defeat a Radiant Saint Master with a 2-colored soul core with a Radiant Sword. A few other Radiant Saint Masters with 2-colored soul cores around the ring commented. Lien Yan sneered inside when he saw Jianshan use the basic Radiant Arte. He thought, it's also a Radiant Sword, but it's not something your 1-colored soul core can block with my 2-colored soul core. With a thought, Lien Yan immediately controlled his Radiant Saint Force and shot out a Radiant Sword as well. On the surface, his Radiant Sword was indeed much more powerful than Jianshan's. Boom! As expected, as soon as the 2 Radiant Swords collided, Jianshan's Radiant Sword exploded with a boom. It was reduced to dust by Lien Yan's Radiant Sword, turning into dense Radiant Saint Force that permeated the surroundings. However, Lien Yan's Radiant Sword did not weaken at all. It continued towards Jianshan as a streak of white light. Be careful, junior brother. Bai Yu called out anxiously from below the ring. She was extremely nervous. He's at a disadvantage right from the start. Looks like this person called Chang Yang is about to lose. A 1-colored soul core is still a 1-colored soul core after all. The difference between it and a 2-colored soul core must be extraordinary. It's not strange for him to lose, indeed. It would be strange if he could win. Many Radiant Saint Masters discussed in the surroundings. They were not surprised by this outcome. Third junior brother, you have to teach Chang Yang a proper lesson. Show him just how great the world is. When Sheng called out from the Cheng clan. When Sheng from the Snowfall Peak also called out from below the ring. His gaze towards Jin Chun was also cold. On the stage, Jin Chen's expression did not change. Instead, his lips curled into an inexplicable smile. Just as the Radiant Sword was about to arrive, Radiant Saint Force surged on his back, condensing into a pair of snow-white wings in a single moment. With a slight flap, he left behind an afterimage where he was, dodging the Radiant Sword with ease and charging straight at Lien Yan. It's the Radiant Wings that can temporarily increase speed. But how can his Radiant Wings be so fast? What speed? I almost can't see it clearly. Can the Radiant Wings really reach such a level of speed? It's 2 or 3 times faster than my Radiant Wings. How'd he do it? Cries immediately rang out from below the ring. Even Bai Yu, who had always feared for Jianshan, became stunned after witnessing Jianshan's speed with the Radiant Wings. She covered her mouth and was speechless for quite a while. This was because even she might not be able to reach Jianshan's speed after using the Radiant Wings. As Jianshan charged towards Lien Yan with the Radiant Wings, he suddenly extended a finger towards Lien Yan gently. With that, the Radiant Saint Force that had been reduced to Radiant Saint Force when the Radiant Sword shattered immediately condensed rapidly, as if it was under his control. It turned into a band of white light, binding up Lien Yin under his stunned gaze. At the same time, Jianshun arrived before Lien Yin with the speed brought by the radiant wings. He raised his hand and directly slapped Lien Yin's left cheek. Slap! With a clear sound, Lien Yin was sent flying by Jianshun's slap just like his fifth junior brother. P.S. On the 8th of August, Xiaoyao has prepared a wave of red packets for everyone, totaling $1,000. The red packets will be announced to everyone in the form of a password. The password will be announced to everyone on WeChat. Xiaoyao will announce the password on his official WeChat account. As a result, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, Xinxing Xiaoyao 110. You can also search for it by entering the pseudonym Xinxing Xiaoyao and follow him. On the 8th of August at 8 in the evening, Xiaoyao will announce the password for the red packets to everyone through his official account. Considering that some of his friends still didn't know how to follow a public account, Xiaoyao wrote another tutorial. First, he opened up the contact list on the WeChat page, and at the top, he would see a blue menu labeled Public Account. He clicked on it and then searched for it using the plus sign on the top right corner of the phone screen. He would be able to find it by typing the pen name Xinxing Xiaoyao in the search box. Chapter 23:02. Immediately, the entire place fell silent. Everyone was stunned by this unbelievable sight. What had they just seen? A Radiant Saint Master with a one-colored soul core had actually sent a Radiant Saint Master with a two-colored soul core flying with a single slap in their first clash. If it were not for the fact that they had witnessed this unbelievable sight, even they would not have believed it. If a Radiant Saint Master with a one-colored soul core had defeated a Radiant Saint Master with a two-colored soul core, they would not have been so shocked. Most importantly, the Radiant Saint Master with a two-colored soul core, who seemed to possess an absolute advantage, had actually been slapped in the face by someone weaker than him. This was just too absurd. Bai Yu, who had originally been worried, was completely stunned now. She stared blankly at Jianshun, who was enveloped by a layer of light. She acted like she did not know Jianshun at all. Wen Cheng and the others from the Snowfall Peak all widened their mouths as well. They stared at Lien Yin in disbelief. They were completely stunned. With a heavy sound, Lien Yin was sent over 20 meters away by Jianshun. He slammed into the wide ring heavily. Half of his face had been reduced to a bloody mess, and all of his teeth had been broken. Lien Yin stood up from the ground while clutching his face. He stared at Jianshun in a daze. He was completely stunned, but soon afterwards his eyes became bright red. They burned with flames of fury as he stared at Jianshun with eyes filled with endless hatred. He howled out hysterically as he charged towards Jianshun. At that moment, Lien Yin had basically lost his mind. He had become extremely crazy. He had actually been slapped in the face by Jianshun with a one-colored soul core despite having a two-colored soul core. This was quite a heavy blow to him. Jianshun dealt with Lien Yin's crazy counterattack with composure. He unleashed Radiant Arts one after another. Although the Radiant Arts were only at the level of a one-colored soul core, every single one of them seemed extremely lifelike and unpredictable when he used them. His usage of Radiant Arts had truly reached perfection in the eyes of the spectating Radiant Saint Masters. It caused countless people to sigh in amazement. Naturally, Jianshun had obtained these Radiant Arts from Han Xin. When he, Bai Yu, and Zhuofeng visited Han Xin for the first time, Han Xin had given them some books regarding Radiant Saint Force. Not only did the books contain cultivation methods, but they also contained some of the most basic Radiant Arts. With Jianshun's current level of cultivation and his powerful soul, he only needed a single glance to grasp the Radiant Arts. As a result, not only was it extremely easy for him to cast them, but they were also ever-changing. He dodged Lien Yin's counterattack nimbly with his radiant wings before finding an opportunity to slap Lien Yin's face again. With a slap, Lien Yin was blown away by Jianshun once again. Lien Yin felt the scorching pain from his face as he hovered in the air. He was extremely furious. He had been slapped twice by Jianshun before everyone, so he was about to explode from anger. Not only was this humiliating to him, but it was also a great humiliation that he would never be able to wash away. Changyang, you better remember this. I will make you regret this. I will definitely make you pay for what happened today 1,000 times over in the future, Lien Yin roared out hysterically in a muffled voice. However, what awaited him was a dazzling radiant sword. Now that Lien Yin had lost his ability to resist, it shot over with a flash of snow-white light, mercilessly stabbing into Lien Yan's Xiongtan. Afterwards, it pierced through Lien Yan's body without slowing down at all. It continued to fly into the distance, passing through a small portion of the square before stabbing into a towering tree, nailing Lien Yin 100 meters into the air. Ark! Lien Yin could not help but cry out. His voice was extremely shrill, immediately alarming everyone on the square. The spectating Radiant Saint Masters all gasped when they saw Lien Yan's miserable state. Their gazes towards Jianshan all underwent a drastic change. As for Baiyu, she was even more shocked to the point of being speechless. Her pair of beautiful large eyes had long since widened to the point that they bulged, and a tempestuous storm surged in her heart. Lien Yin was a powerful figure that even she could not defeat. Yet right now, Jianshan, who was clearly weaker than her in her eyes, had actually rendered Lien Yin helpless with his one-colored soul core. This had an extremely great impact on her soul. At the very front of the sky-gazing peak plaza, there was a platform that was tens of meters tall. There were several deacons dressed in black, standing there expressionlessly. Their cold gazes swept across the entire plaza as they continued to maintain this place. Someone, go and report everything that happened in the third ring to the Peak Lord. At this moment, one of the envoys who seemed to be the leader said emotionlessly, "Is there a need to alarm the Peak Lord for a battle between two low-level disciples?" "Yes, there's an extremely great need. Go and report to the Peak Lord immediately. Also, take the recording from the third ring for the Peak Lord to see." Understood. The envoys immediately flew towards the top of the sky-gazing peak. On the top of the sky-gazing peak, 3 men in white robes that represented hallowed Saint Masters conversed before a jade table within a palace completely carved from white jade. Among the 3 men, one of them was already over 40 years old. He had the appearance of a middle-aged man, and his face was filled with a resoluteness that could only be left behind by someone who had gone through the trials of wind, frost, rain, and snow. However, his hair had already become snow-white, and it was casually draped over his shoulders. The white-haired, middle-aged man was the lord of the sky-gazing peak. The other 2 men seemed relatively younger, only in their 20s. They possessed extraordinary presences and were filled with confidence. Even before the lord of the sky-gazing peak, one of the 99 main peaks of the Radiant Saint Hall, they remained calm and composed. At this moment, a black-robed envoy walked in. After bowing politely to the Lord of the Sky-gazing peak, he passed a crystal over and said, "Peak Lord, this is the recording of the battle in the third ring. Caretaker Bai has specially sent me to deliver it to you." Afterwards, the envoys gave a simple explanation of what had happened in the third ring. A disciple with a one-colored soul core defeating a disciple with a two-colored soul core. Although this doesn't happen often on our sky-gazing peak, it's not too shocking. The Lord of the Sky-gazing peak smiled indifferently after hearing the envoy's simple explanation. He did not pay too much attention to it. However, he still took the crystal stone that recorded the video of the battle in the third arena and casually watched it. However, the expression of the peak master of the sky-gazing peak quickly changed from its initial nonchalance to a solemn one. In the end, it became completely solemn. He only has a one-colored soul core, yet his control over Radiant Saint Force has reached such a level. How shocking. Who is he? The Lord of the Sky-gazing peak asked. P.S. On the 8th of August, Xiaoyao has prepared a wave of red packets for everyone. There's a total of 1,000 yuan in total. The red packets will be announced to everyone in the form of a password. Xiaoyao will be announcing the password on his official WeChat account. As a result, please follow Xiaoyao's official WeChat account, Xinxing Xiaoyao 110, or you can search for it using the pseudonym Xinxing Xiaoyao and follow him. At 8 in the evening on the 8th of August, Xiaoyao will announce the password to everyone through his official account. considering that some people do not know how to follow his official account. Xiaoyao has written a tutorial. First, when you open your contacts on WeChat, you will see a blue menu labeled Official Account at the top. After clicking on it, you can search for it using the plus sign on the top right corner of the screen. You can find it by typing the pseudonym Xinxing Xiaoyao in the search box. You can follow him after finding him. Chapter 2303. Peak Lord. He's one of the 3 new disciples you've taken in. His name is Chang Yang. The envoy replied politely. The Peak Lord of the soaring clouds peak. That Han Xan who recently broke through with a 7-colored soul core? The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, asked. That's Protector Han Xin. The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, stood up. He looked in the direction of the soaring clouds peak and murmured, This Han Xin sure is lucky. He actually managed to get such an outstanding disciple in his first batch of disciples. The 2 young men who sat with the Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, could not help but become curious when they heard the Lord's high evaluation. One of them stood up and said indifferently, Peak Lord, has another impressive 9-star genius appeared in our Radiant Saint Hall? The young man was not very powerful. He only had a 4-colored soul core. According to the classification of fighters, he was a deity. He was indeed nothing special in the Radiant Saint Hall, one of the peak organizations on the desolate plain. However, his status in the Radiant Saint Hall was extraordinary. He stood on the same level as the Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, one of the 99 main peaks. This was because he was one of the 5 9-star geniuses of the Radiant Saint Hall. His name was Giant Shin, and he was a candidate to take part in the competition between the Chosen Saint and the Radiant Saint Hall. I don't know what star rank he is, but there are recordings of his battle here. Take a look. The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, passed the crystal over. Giant Shin and the other young man accepted the crystal and watched it. Very soon, they finished watching the battle, and they both became stern. This disciple with a 1-colored soul core truly has an amazing use of Radiant Saint Force, said Giant Shin. That's right. At the very least, even I feel inferior in that aspect. It's really difficult to believe that a Radiant Saint Master with a 1-colored soul core can control Radiant Saint Force to such an unbelievable level. The young man beside Giant Shin praised. His name was Xin Bin. Just like Giant Shin, he was one of the 5 9-star geniuses of the Radiant Saint Hall. Are the 2 of you interested in meeting this disciple called Chang Yang on the square with me? The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, asked Giant Shin and Xin Bin. I happen to want to meet this person, Giant Shin said. I have the same idea, Xin Bin said. Afterwards, the Peak Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, led Giant Shin and Xin Bin to the square. As soon as they approached the square, they heard a loud shout from afar. Are there any disciples of the Snowfall Peak who still dares to fight? His voice was filled with provocation. Mixed within it was a trace of disdain. This person called Chang Yang Sure is arrogant. However, he has the right to be arrogant. The sky-gazing peak master, who had just arrived from the edge of the square, said with a smile, Greetings, Peak Master. At the same time, the black-robed envoys who stood on the platform in the distance immediately flew over and bowed towards the Peak Lord. Long, this kid you've discovered is very impressive. I just wonder what star genius he is. The Peak Lord nodded before speaking to the leader of the envoys. The envoy called by Long replied, We've already investigated. The disciple of the soaring clouds peak, Chang Yang, is a 1-star genius. What? He's only a 1-star genius? The Peak Lord frowned slightly and asked in disbelief. Long nodded. He is indeed a 1-star genius from the results of the investigation. The Peak Lord said nothing more. He stared at the straight figure who stood on the ring in an awe-inspiring manner from very far away as he sank into his thoughts. Is there no one else from the Snowfall Peak? At this moment, Jianshun called out once again. Chang Yang, don't be arrogant. Our Snowfall Peak just doesn't want to bully the weak. If we win like this, it won't be honorable. The 4th disciple of the Snowfall Peak replied with an ugly expression. You'll have to defeat me first. You should be the 4th disciple of the Snowfall Peak, Wu Bin. Wu Bin, you have a 2-colored soul core while I only have a 1-colored soul core. I challenge you right now. Are you bold enough to accept? Jianshun said loudly. His voice basically rang through the entire square. At this moment, more and more people had gathered in the surroundings of the ring. The fourth disciple of the Snowfall Peak, Wu Bin, had an extremely ugly expression. He gritted his teeth and stood below the ring. He did not dare to take a single step onto it. Although he had a two-colored soul core, his strength was nowhere near as great as Lien Yan's. Even Lien Yan was not Jianshun's opponent and had been viciously humiliated by Jianshun. If he went up, he would just be asking to be humiliated. It looks like you don't dare to enter the ring. But that makes sense. Even your third senior brother, Lien Yan, has been beaten to the ground by me. You're obviously not my opponent, Jianshun said disdainfully as he stood on the ring. Wu Bin's face immediately darkened and paled when he heard that. Jianshun looked at the second senior brother of the Snowfall Peak, Wen Cheng, who also stood there with a sunken face. He said, Wen Cheng, I represent the Soaring Clouds Peak and challenge you, the second disciple of the Snowfall Peak. Are you bold enough to accept? All right, all right, all right. Changyang, very good. You actually dare to challenge me. Wen Cheng's face immediately paled. His gaze became extremely piercing as he gritted his teeth. Killing intent surged within him. However, he also did not dare to step onto the ring so easily. He had clearly witnessed Chang Yang's strength. He did indeed have a one-colored soul core on the surface, but when it came to actual battle, he could even defeat Lien Yan with a two-colored soul core easily. Without absolute confidence, he did not want to fight Jianshun so easily. Even if he wanted to fight, he cannot do it here. If he lost, he really would be too ashamed to face anyone in the future. After all, he did not have a two-colored soul core. He was a Radiant Saint Master with a three-colored soul core, and he had already reached the threshold of the laws of the Hallowed. The Peak Lord has come. Greetings to the Peak Lord, greetings to the Peak Lord. At this moment, the crowd surged as cries rang out. The white-haired Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak, had arrived with Jianshun and Xen Bin under the accompaniment of a group of black-robed envoys. That seems to be Jianshun, one of the 5 9-star geniuses of our Radiant Saint Hall. Even Jianshun has come. It's not just Gongzheng Xan. Even Xian Bing, one of the 5 9-star geniuses, has come here. 2 of the 5 9-star geniuses have actually come. It's said that they're about to compete for the position of Chosen Saint. The Chosen Saint this time will be born from the 5 of them. The arrival of the 2 9-star geniuses immediately caused an uproar among all the Radiant Saint Masters gathered there. In the eyes of many people, 9-star geniuses were idol-like existences. In the eyes of many people, they were unreachable existences. Just seeing them was a great honor. Which one of you is Wen Cheng? Why don't you get onto the ring and fight Changyang? At this moment, Jianshun spoke. His voice was very gentle and indifferent, but it was filled with an unquestionable determination. Chapter 2304. A cold glint flashed across Wen Cheng's eyes when he heard Gongzheng Xian's tone, which seemed to be determined by fate. However, right now, the chosen saint of the Radiant Saint Hall was replacing the old, and the new chosen saint would come from the 5 9-star geniuses. They could not afford to offend any of the 9-star geniuses at a time like this. As a result, even though Wen Cheng was angered by Jianshun's condescending attitude, he did not dare to show it. Instead, he forced out a smile and clasped his fist. Since Senior Jianshun has spoken, I, Wen Cheng, will go onto the stage and teach this ignorant Changyang a lesson. With that, Wen Cheng leapt up and landed on the stage. Jianshun's eyes were like a venomous snake's. He stared at Wen Cheng with a fake smile and said, Wen Cheng, you're a Radiant Saint Master with a 3-colored soul core, and I've heard from my junior sister that you've already touched on the laws of the Hallowed. Don't lose to me. Just you? Wen Cheng snorted coldly. He dared not be careless when facing Jianshun, who could defeat Lien Yan so easily. He took the initiative to attack. Forming a seal with his hands, Radiant Saint Force surged from him, condensing into a white pillar of light that shot towards Jianshun. Jianshun became cautious as well. He could not reveal his identity as a fighter in the Radiant Saint Hall, so he could only use the cultivation of a 1-colored soul core. He could not afford to be careless when facing Wen Cheng, who was 2 cultivation levels higher than him, with such a weak cultivation. Jinshin's radiant wings appeared on his back again. He left behind an afterimage as he dodged Wen Cheng's attack by a hair's breadth. He rapidly approached Wen Cheng. "You want to deal with me the same way you dealt with Lien Yin? You're far too naive. I'll show you the power of a 3-colored soul core." Wen Cheng snorted coldly. Milky white light shone from his body, condensing into a huge white shield, enveloping his entire body within. He stood within the shield and attacked Jinshin fearlessly. Jinshin dodged Wen Cheng's attacks with the speed and agility of his radiant wings. A few radiant swords shot out from his hands, striking the white shield around Wen Cheng. However, Jinshin's radiant swords could only make the shield shake a few times. They were unable to break through it. Jinshin's eyes narrowed. He thought, Wen Cheng really is a radiant Saint Master with a 3-colored soul core. All he needs to do is stand there and defend, and I can't break through it. Of radiant Saint Masters with a 3-colored radiant Saint Master. All he needs to do is stand there, and of him, and of him, of radiant Saint Master. Cheng and Saint Masters, radiant Saint of Saint, of Saint. Radiant Rain. At this moment, Wen Cheng bellowed out. A dense layer of radiant saint light radiated from his body, condensing into white specks of light the size of raindrops. They were densely packed, filling the air in layers. Like a storm, they shot out in all directions with a sharp presence, enveloping the entire ring. No matter how fast Jinshin was, he was unable to dodge such a dense attack. However, he did not become flustered at all. The 3 radiant swords revolved around him, forming a sword formation that shattered the rain of radiant rain. Every single droplet of radiant rain possessed astonishing power. Jinshin's radiant swords shattered very quickly, but Jinshin was always able to condense new radiant swords with his supreme control over radiant saint force. Suddenly, Jinshin extended a finger. The 3 radiant swords immediately lined up before turning into white streaks of light. They passed through the gaps in the rain of radiant rain and struck the white shield around Wen Cheng heavily. Boom! With a boom, Wen Cheng's shield shook violently. It rapidly dimmed as well. The energy in the shield rapidly drained away. Wen Cheng's face changed. He immediately weakened his control over the radiant rain and began to focus on stabilizing his shield. However, at this moment, a gleam of light erupted from Jinshin's eyes. They became extremely sharp. In the next moment, a portion of the radiant rain was forcefully halted around him. They no longer continued to attack Jinshin. Instead, they turned into streaks of white light and shot back at Wen Cheng. Jinshin forcefully seized control of this portion of the rain of radiant light. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. A Radiant Saint Master with a 1-colored soul core can actually control the radiant arts cast by a Radiant Saint Master with a 3-colored soul core. This is unbelievable. The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, could not help but sigh from outside the ring. Chang Yang's control over Radiant Saint Force is even more terrifying than I imagined it to be, Xian Bin said emotionlessly. Gongzheng Xian nodded in agreement. That does seem to be the case. Fortunately, he only has a 1-colored soul core, and he's not a hallowed Saint Master. Otherwise, we would have gained a powerful opponent in the competition between the chosen saint this time. Only 9-star geniuses have the right to take part in the competition. He's only a 1-star genius, said Xian Bin. The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, shook his head when he heard that. He said, he's definitely not as simple as a 1-star genius. Yeah. Although I don't know whether he's a 9-star genius or not, it's impossible for him to be a 1-star genius. It's just a pity that he missed the right time. So he's not fated to take part in the competition. Giant Shin said before looking at the Lord of the Sky, gazing peak. Peak Lord, who do you think will win their battle? It's hard to say. It's still hard to say. The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, said sternly. Giant Shin smiled mysteriously. If that's the case, why don't I make a bet with the Peak Lord? Let's bet on who will be the final victor of this battle. The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, smiled bitterly when he heard that. He said, "Looks like you're still fixated on the 1,000-leaf lotus in my hands. Whatever. If I keep the 1,000-leaf lotus, the other 3 9-star geniuses will probably come looking for me one by one. If that's the case, I'll just toss it out as soon as possible to avoid future troubles. Gongzheng Xin, who do you think will win between the two of them?" "I'll bet on Wensheng with a 3-colored soul core. I refuse to believe that this person called Changyang can defeat Wensheng with a 3-colored soul core with a 1-colored soul core." Giant Shin looked at Wensheng and continued, "If I win, the Peak Lord's 1,000-leaf lotus will be mine. If I lose, I'll offer a droplet of soul fluid to the Peak Lord. I want a 1,000-leaf lotus as well. Count me in as well. I'll bet on a draw. If I win, the 1,000-leaf lotus will be mine." Giant Shin, "Peak Lord, you don't have any objections, right?" The other 9-star genius, Xian Bin, added. He and Giant Shin had both come for the Peak Lord's 1,000-leaf lotus, so they naturally would not miss out on this opportunity. "It looks like I can only bet on Chang Yang's victory." The Lord of the Sky, gazing peak, smiled helplessly. This was because they were not optimistic about Chang Yang's victory. They knew just how great the difference between a 2-colored soul core and a 3-colored soul core was. Chang Yang could defeat a 2-colored soul core, but it was impossible for him to defeat a 3-colored soul core. It would already be extremely impressive if he could reach a draw. Moreover, Wensheng had already touched on the laws of the Hallowed. Even though he was not a Hallowed Saint Master, his battle prowess was still much greater than regular 3-colored soul cores. Chapter 23:05. Boom! At this moment, a great rumble rang out from the stage. Wensheng's energy shield had finally shattered after enduring the attack from Jinshin's radiant rain. The powerful ripples of energy turned into an invisible shockwave, pushing Wensheng back. "Why, you actually—" Wensheng's face was filled with disbelief. He pointed at Jinshin and became speechless from shock. Chang Yang, who only had a 1-colored soul core, had forcefully taken control of the radiant rain from him. Chang Yang had used it to attack him instead. Was there any justice in this world? However, Jinshin did not hesitate at all after destroying Wensheng's shield. He approached Wensheng in a flash and directly swung his radiant sword at him. Wensheng's face changed slightly. In his opinion, Jinshin's reactions were just too fast, and his attacks were just too swift. He no longer had the time to use radiant arts to block the incoming radiant sword. He immediately condensed a pair of radiant wings and retreated. Clearly, his battle experience was nowhere near as great as Jinshin's. Just this small mistake had reduced him to an extremely passive state from having the upper hand in the beginning. Jinshin used this opportunity to pursuing Wensheng closely. He stabbed out mercilessly with his radiant sword, reaching Wensheng's chest in the blink of an eye. Wensheng's face changed drastically. Although he had some battle experience, he had never been in such a tense battle. He immediately became flustered after Jinshin had taken the initiative and erupted with a barrage of attacks. In his panic, he directly rolled away and dodged the radiant sword by a hair's breadth. However, even with that being the case, a long gash had appeared on his white robes from the radiant sword. His originally spotless robes were now covered in dust. Wensheng's face had already paled when he climbed out of the stage. He was about to explode from anger. He had lost his dignity by rolling away, and it would be difficult for him to raise his head in the Light Palace in the future. "Chang Yang, I swear I'll make you regret this." Wensheng let out a deep roar. He also condensed a radiant sword and swung it at Jinshin as quickly as he could. In Wensheng's eyes, the speed of the radiant sword had indeed reached his limit. He was confident that even regular Radiant Saint Masters with 3-colored soul cores would not be able to dodge his attack. However, in Jinshin's eyes, it was still as slow as a snail. However, this time, Jinshin did not choose to dodge. Instead, he deliberately acted as if he was caught off guard and forcefully endured the blow with his body. At the same time, when the radiant sword was about to hit him, he secretly mobilized the chaotic force within him. He used the chaotic force to form a sharp blade that pierced through his chaotic body. As a result, Wen Cheng's radiant sword perfectly struck the wound created by Jianshan's chaotic force, piercing through Jianshan's body. Jianshan ignored his wounds. He enveloped himself with a layer of radiant saint force as he stabbed Wen Cheng with his radiant sword. Wen Cheng had never experienced such intense pain before. He immediately produced a painful cry and retreated in a hurry, pulling away from Jianshan. Jianshan sneered. With a thought, a radiant sword appeared behind Wen Cheng. As Wen Cheng retreated, he directly collided with the tip of the radiant sword. He immediately produced another painful groan. Jianshan's eyes were cold. He took a step forward and raised the radiant sword above his head. It shone with dazzling light. Just when he was about to slash down at Wen Cheng, a voice suddenly rang out in his head. "Changyang, I'm Jianshan. You can only lose this battle. Victory is not an option." Jianshan ordered Jianshan from above. His voice left no room for objection. Of course, he communicated with Jianshan secretly, so he was not afraid of unimportant people hearing him. With that, Jianshan stood there confidently with his arms crossed, as if he was certain that Changyang would not dare to disobey his orders. After all, he was a 9-star genius of the Radiant Saint Hall. His identity was indeed very intimidating to many regular disciples. "Changyang, I'm Xian Bin. It's already an extremely impressive achievement for you to force a Radiant Saint Master with a 3-colored soul core in such a horrible state. Let's end this battle as a draw." The other 9-star genius, Xian Bin, also communicated with Jianshan secretly. However, his voice was not as forceful as Jianshan's. Jianshan sneered inside when he heard the communication between Jianshan and Xian Bin. His senses were unimaginably powerful now, so it was impossible for him to not know about the bet between the two 9-star geniuses and the Lord of the Sky Gazing Peak. If it were anyone else, they would naturally not dare to offend a 9-star genius who was about to become the new chosen saint. However, they just happened to encounter Jianshan. Swish! Jianshan ignored Jianshan and Xian Bin. With a flash of white light, the radiant sword in his hand swung down without any hesitation at all with resplendent light, cutting off Wen Cheng's arm. Wen Cheng immediately produced a miserable shriek like a pig being slaughtered. The heart-wrenching pain caused his entire body to spasm uncontrollably. He had almost fainted. The spectating Radiant Saint Masters all fell into an uproar when they saw this. Many of them had been stunned by Jianshan's bloody methods. After all, these Radiant Saint Masters were not like fighters who had experienced countless battles. Some of them had even emerged from mountains of corpses and seas of blood, so they had become accustomed to bloody scenes long ago. On the other side, Jianshan's face became rather ugly as well. His face sank as he stared at Jianshan with a cold light flickering in his eyes. He was secretly furious. This Changyang really doesn't know what's good for him. He's just a disciple with a 1-colored soul core, yet he dares to disobey my orders. Humph. Xian Bin frowned slightly as well. His gaze towards Jianshan was filled with displeasure. "This Changyang is becoming more and more to my liking," the white-haired peak master chuckled. The white-haired Lord of the Sky Gazing Peak chuckled. His gaze towards Jianshan was filled with undisguised admiration. "Changyang, why don't you stop? You must lose this battle," Jianshan said to Jianshan again. This time, his voice was much sharper. However, Jianshan ignored the message. He arrived before Wen Cheng in a single step and grabbed Wen Cheng's collar. He stared coldly at Wen Cheng, who had become sheet white from the pain. He said icily, "Wen Cheng, I don't have any particularly great grievances with you, but you should have never, ever harbored thoughts about my junior sister. This is what you get for harming my junior sister." With that, Jianshan raised his hand and slapped Wen Cheng across the face. Chapter 23:06. Immediately, a bright red mark appeared on Wen Cheng's face. However, Jianshan did not feel satisfied. He ignored Wen Cheng's murderous gaze and slapped him on the other side of his face. What happened next stunned everyone in the surroundings. Jianshan wanted to properly humiliate Wen Cheng. He slapped him over a dozen times, causing Wen Cheng's face to become bright red and swollen. In the end, Jinshin's hand was wrapped in a layer of milky white light. With a heavy blow, he sent Wen Cheng flying, directly falling out of the ring. With that, the outcome of the battle between the one-colored soul core and the three-colored soul core had been decided. However, the outcome had exceeded everyone's expectations, causing the entire place to fall silent. Changyang, you're very good. I'll remember you. A while later, Jianshin broke the silence first. He said to Jianshin emotionlessly before turning around and leaving. Heavens, am I seeing things? This can't be real. This definitely can't be real. A Radiant Saint Master with a three-colored soul core has actually been defeated by a Radiant Saint Master with a one-colored soul core. This is too unbelievable. I can't believe that this is real. Changyang has basically defied the heavens. Only at this moment did a great commotion erupt from the square. All the Radiant Saint Masters cried out, either emotionally or in complete shock. Everyone looked at the bloodied Jianshin in the center of the ring. Admiration filled their faces. Little junior brother has won. Little junior brother has won. Little junior brother has actually defeated Wen Cheng. Bai Yu, who was also standing below the ring, was completely stunned. She found it very difficult to accept all of this. She found it very difficult to believe that this was real. Jianshin stood in the ring as he clutched the wound on his chest. Even though his chaotic blood had leaked out, he had hidden the great power within it long ago, so it was no different from ordinary blood. He glanced past the Radiant Saint Masters who constantly cried out in the surroundings. He remained calm. Changyang. At this moment, the Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak, called out. His voice was very calm, but it rang through the entire square, drowning out the cries of the Radiant Saint Masters. Immediately, the noisy square quieted down. Greetings to the Peak Lord. Jianshin clasped his fist towards the Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak, in a timely manner. Even though his robes were no longer neat, the blood-soaked robes did not ruin his bearing at all. Instead, it made him seem even more graceful. Changyang, you're the most powerful Radiant Saint Master with a one-colored soul core I've ever seen. Even I am extremely shocked by how you defeated a three-colored soul core Radiant Saint Master with a one-colored soul core. The Lord of the Sky, Gazing Ring, smiled. Afterwards, with a flip of his hand, he took out a thumb-sized, violet lotus seed from his space ring. He said to Jianshin, this thousand-leaf lotus is extremely beneficial to hallowed Saint Masters below five-colored soul cores. It could drastically increase their strength. Now, I'll give it to you as a reward. I hope you can comprehend the laws of the hallowed sooner and become a hallowed Saint Master. As he said that, the thousand-leaf lotus in the Peak Lord's hand slowly drifted over to Jianshin under the protection of Radiant Saint Force. Thank you, Peak Lord. Jianshin did not stand on ceremony. After clasping his hands and thanking the Peak Lord, he accepted the thousand-leaf lotus under the envious gazes of all the Radiant Saint Masters. Afterwards, the Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak, said a few more words before leaving. Changyang, may I ask if you're willing to exchange a thousand-leaf lotus with me? Of course, I definitely won't let you lose out. At this moment, the nine-star genius Bin arrived before Jianshin and asked with a gentle smile. Jianshin studied the thousand-leaf lotus in his hand. Although it was not of a particularly high grade, it was still very useful to Radiant Saint Masters, so he immediately declined Bin's offer. The thousand-leaf lotus isn't very useful to Junior Changyang. If you're willing to exchange it with me, I'm willing to give you heavenly resources that are 10 times the value of the thousand-leaf lotus. Junior Changyang, think about it properly. Come find me once you've made up your mind. With that, Bin left. Bai Long, you've recorded the battle between Changyang and Wen Cheng, right? The Lord of the Sky, Gazing Peak, stood in his pure white palace on the top of the Sky, Gazing Peak, as he spoke to a black-robed envoy behind him. I've recorded it. I've recorded everything that happened on every single ring, Bai Long replied politely. All right, send the video of this battle to the temple and let the elders have a look. Changyang is an extremely impressive genius. Our Radiant Saint Hall should nurture him with great effort, but we still need the elders to make a decision on this matter, said the Lord of the Sky, gazing peak. Yes, peak lord. Jianshan had already left the ring on the square. Wherever he passed by, the radiant Saint Masters gathered in the surroundings would open up a path for him. Junior sister, let's go back. Jianshan directly arrived before Baiyu and said to her, "Oh." At this moment, Baiyu was still in a daze. She glanced at the unconscious Wen Cheng on the ground before following behind Jianshan blankly. At the same time, the black-robed deacon by Long left Sky, gazing peak with the crystal that recorded the battle. He flew to the sacred hall that stood above the clouds. The sacred hall was extremely heavily guarded. As soon as Bai Long set foot in the sacred hall, he was stopped by two middle-aged men in violet robes. Bai Long knew that these people were the guards of the sacred hall. Whether it be their status, or strength, they were much greater than the black-robed envoys. He immediately bowed slightly and said, "I am an envoy of the Sky, gazing peak. Under the orders of the Peak Lord, I am here to gift this to the esteemed elders. Just leave it to us." "You can leave," one of the guards said emotionlessly. Bai Long hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he handed the crystal to a purple-robed guard and left the sacred hall. The two guards directly made their way into the sacred hall with the crystal that recorded Jinshan's battle. "Stop right there, the two of you." At this moment, a gentle voice rang out from the side. Jianshan walked over steadily with his hands behind his back. The two guards clasped their fists and bowed when they saw Jianshan. Not only was Jianshan a 9-star genius in the Radiant Saint Hall, but he was also the disciple of an elder. His status was so great that the guards could not compare to him. "What did the envoy give you earlier?" Jianshan held his head high and asked proudly. "It's a crystal. He wants us to pass it to an elder," replied one of the guards. A cold light flashed through Jianshan's eyes when he heard that. He said, "My teacher is one of the elders. I just happen to be on my way to see him, so give the crystal to me. I'll take it to him for you." The two guards looked at each other. They did not dare to disobey Jianshan, who was extremely likely to become the chosen saint. They could only pass the crystal to Jianshan obediently. Jianshan left with the crystal before stopping in a remote place. He looked at the crystal that recorded Jinshan's battle and sneered. With a clench of his hand, he immediately crushed the crystal to dust. Chapter 2307. Just as Jianshan returned to the soaring clouds peak with Baiyu after a great victory, the distant cloud plain had already descended into chaos. The Tian Alliance led by the Tian Empire and the Resistance Alliance led by the Heavens Link Peak had already engaged in an all-out war. Even though the Resistance Alliance led by the Heavens Link Peak also gathered around half of the Peak clans on the Cloud Plain, they were constantly pushed back in their struggle against the Tian Empire. They did not lose to the Tian Empire in terms of Peak experts, but the Tian Empire possessed the Heavenless Demon Exalt, which directly pulled apart the difference in strength. Coupled with the fact that the eternal empires of the four regions had all joined the Tian Empire, not only did the Tian Empire possess an advantage in terms of Peak experts, but their core forces were extremely powerful as well. Under the lead of the four eternal empires, a large number of primordial realm experts and tremendous armies had already gathered. They engaged in an intense battle with the core forces of the Resistance Alliance. The Cloud Plain had already been engulfed in the flames of war. Corpses littered the ground in many places as rivers of blood flowed. It seemed like hell. The Lord of the Heavens Link Peak had fought against the Heavenless Demon Exalt several times in outer space. Now that he was heavily injured, he retreated from the central region with the people of the Resistance Alliance and defended the northern region. The central region had completely fallen under the control of the Tian Empire now. Moreover, the branch of the heavenly demon religion on the Cloud Plain had already been destroyed by the Heavenless Demon Exalt. Aside from Huayan, the other two vice leaders had all died in battle. Huayan had renounced the heavenly demon religion and submitted himself to the Heavenless Demon Exalt. Due to the fact that the divine kingdom of Pingtian in the southern region of the Cloud Plain was rather remote, it was not affected by the flames of war in the short term. As a result, it remained the same as before. However, The many cultivators who resided in the divine kingdom of Pingtian were still in a state of panic. They were afraid that the flames of war would reach them one day. Compared to these people, the people from the Tianyuan family in the Dong and province were much calmer. They did not seem to be worried that the flames of battle would reach them. Of course, their calmness was all because of a single sentence from Ming Dong. Don't worry, with me here, even if the heavenless demon Exalt comes in person, he won't dare to touch a single hair on the Tianyuan family. Although Ming Dong's words sounded ridiculous, everyone in the Tianyuan family believed him without a doubt. All of this was because Ming Dong was accompanied by a peak chaotic prime at all times. Because of this, the Tianyuan family was peaceful while the flames of war raged across the cloud plain. Those who were cultivating, and those who were doing things. Everything proceeded in an orderly manner. At this moment, a group of several dozen people covered in blood flew over from the Dong province. They approached the Tianyuan family with lightning speed. Ming Dong, who was strolling through the gardens of the Tianyuan family with Yin Shaoyan, seemed to sense the approach of these people as well. A cold light immediately flashed through his eyes. There really are people who aren't afraid of death, daring to provoke our Tianyuan family, Ming Dong said coldly as killing intent filled his body. However, at this moment, the greatest elder of the Tianyuan family, Shi Yu, flew into the air in a single moment. She looked at the several dozen people who were rapidly approaching them, and she immediately became excited. "Mother!" Shi Yu cried out, and immediately went up to receive them. "You are..." The graceful and luxuriously dressed woman at the very front of the group also had an excited expression. She arrived before Shi Yu with a single step and extended her arms, hugging Shi Yu tightly in her embrace. The woman was the empress of the Shi dynasty. However, at that moment, Empress Dowager's body was covered in blood. Even among the people following behind her, many of them were covered in blood and injured. "Mother, what's wrong with you? What happened in the palace? And where's my father? Is my father fine?" She was filled with anxiety as she looked at the blood on the empress. At this moment, Ming Dong flew into the air with Yin Shaoyan as well. He watched on from afar. Now's not the time to talk about this. Immediately take everyone from the Tianyuan family and leave this place. The sooner the better. There's not much time left, the empress said anxiously. She pulled Shi Yu into the Tianyuan family. She did not have the time to explain it all. "Mother, what happened?" She was filled with unease as she asked worriedly. "Don't ask for now. Listen to Mother and immediately gather the important people," the empress said sternly. After that, she looked at a short old man behind her and said, "Master Tian, please prepare the teleportation formation immediately." The short old man was also an infinite prime. He nodded when he heard that and immediately began to cast down the teleportation formation. "It's very safe here. There's no need for you to leave." At this moment, Ming Dong walked over with Yin Shaoyan and said calmly. The empress glanced past Ming Dong. Even though she did not recognize Ming Dong, she could tell that he was only a divine king with a single glance. Coupled with how urgent the situation was right now, she was in no mood to waste her breath on Ming Dong. She only ordered Protector Tian to cast down the teleportation formation quickly. Ha, you still want to leave? Empress, do you think you can leave?" At this moment, a bellow rang out from afar. A group of people rapidly approached them from afar. They moved extremely quickly, invading the territory of the provincial city in the blink of an eye and surrounding the Empress group. The Empress' face immediately became extremely ugly. She looked at Shi Yu beside her and became determined. She thought, "I never thought they'd come so quickly. Even if I die here, I have to send you out. I can't let you be harmed at all." The leading old man glanced past the Empress and Shi Yu and the group of people. He sneered and said, "Empress, why aren't you running anymore? However, not only will you not be able to escape today, but even your daughter, Princess Shi Yu, won't be able to escape death. The Tianyuan family, that insignificant clan, will be destroyed because of you." It would have been fine if the old man had not mentioned the Tianyuan family, but as soon as he mentioned the Tianyuan family, Ming Dong's face immediately sank. Killing intent filled his eyes as he sneered. Really? I like to see just who is bold enough to touch a single blade of grass from the Tianyuan family today. The old man stared at Ming Dong in great surprise when he heard that. At that moment, he even doubted his ears. A mere divine king had actually said something like that to him. Not only was the old man stunned, but even the empress looked at Ming Dong in surprise. After being stunned, the old man began to snicker coldly. He looked at Ming Dong coldly and said, "The puny Tianyuan family can be wiped out with a wave of my hand. Today, I'll show you just how I'll wipe out this insignificant clan." With that, the old man directly pressed his hand towards the Tianyuan family. Immediately, the powerful pressure of a ninth heavenly layer infinite prime radiated from him. A huge hand appeared in the air, radiating with terrifying pulses of energy. It enveloped the Tianyuan family. Chapter 23:08. The old man was extremely powerful, having reached the peak of infinite prime. With his strength, he was basically invincible in an ancient empire like the divine kingdom of Pingtian. The huge hand he condensed possessed surging pulses of energy. Let alone destroying the Tianyuan family, it could even raise the entire provincial city to the ground. The empress sighed secretly when she saw this. She knew that the fate of the Tianyuan family had already been decided. It was impossible for them to escape. Even if she interfered, she would not be able to change anything. The old man's actions had completely infuriated Ming Dong. Ming Dong's eyes became extremely frightening. He stared straight at the old man as killing intent surged from him. He did not hide it at all. Ming Dong pointed at the old man and suddenly roared, "Kill him!" His voice was filled with unconcealable rage. The middle-aged man in a white robe who had been following Ming Dong nodded slightly when he heard Ming Dong's words. He glanced at the old man indifferently and waved his hand casually. Immediately, primordial realm laws that made the old man, who was a ninth heavenly layer infinite prime, shiver suddenly descended. It turned into a dazzling streak of golden light in the middle-aged man's hand, piercing through space and arriving before the old man in a single instance. Under the old man's shocked gaze, it struck him mercilessly. There was no deafening boom. The moment the golden light struck the old man, he was silently reduced to ashes. Whether it was his body or his blood, they all dispersed before everyone. Nothing was left behind. Even his Yuan spirit had been reduced to ashes. A ninth heavenly layer infinite prime did not even have a chance to cry out. He had been slain by the middle-aged man, just like that. When such a shocking sight landed in the eyes of everyone present, they immediately shuddered. At that moment, including the empress, everyone's gazes gathered on the scholarly middle-aged man who stood silently behind Ming Dong. Their gazes were filled with shock. "Who else dares to kill my brother's Tianyuan family? Step forward." Ming Dong did not even glance at the old man who had been reduced to ashes. Instead, he glared at the people who had come after the empress. He called out as killing intent surged from him. The expressions of the people who had come after the empress all changed when they heard that. They could not help but stagger a few steps back as fear filled their eyes. At that moment, none of them dared to underestimate Ming Dong anymore. The middle-aged man's deterrence made them all shiver. Even though there were infinite primes among them, they did not dare to say anything. "You're not welcome in the Dong'an province. I'll give you 3 seconds to piss off. If you're still here after 3 seconds, Uncle Ming, leave none of you alive," Ming Dong said sternly. "Understood." The middle-aged man behind him replied indifferently. He glanced past the group of people calmly, but he shivered when he saw the people who had hunted down the empress. "Let's go." There was no need for 3 seconds at all. In just a few seconds, all of them had left. Emperor, Empress, and the others, who were prepared to fight to the death, were also dumbstruck by this sudden turn of events. Who are they?" The Empress, who was still rather shaken, sent a message to Shiyu carefully. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable shock. She already knew that the middle-aged man Ming Dong referred to as Uncle Ming was very powerful, so she was mentally prepared. As a result, she remained composed. Immediately, She pulled the Empress over to Ming Dong and introduced him. Mother, this is Ming Dong. He's the brother of Patriarch Jianshen. Shiyu and Ming Dong were already extremely familiar with one another. So even though Ming Dong had displayed quite a lot of strength, she did not act cautiously before him at all. However, the Empress was unable to remain as composed as Shiyu. She clasped her fist towards Ming Dong cautiously and said gratefully, "So it's young hero Ming Dong. Thank you for your assistance this time. The two of us are extremely grateful." The Empress could tell with a single glance that the terrifyingly powerful middle-aged man seemed to follow Ming Dong completely. As a result, she did not dare to be careless at all when she faced Ming Dong. She struggled to imagine just how terrifying Ming Dong's origins were for him to be protected by such a powerful chaotic prime. And the chaotic prime even seemed to listen to him. "I should be the one thanking you. Thank you for looking after the Tianyuan family in the past few years. Otherwise, my brother's Tianyuan family probably would not have survived until now," Ming Dong said modestly to the Empress. Ming Dong smiled and said to the Empress extremely modestly, he would never put on any airs before she used birth mother. Afterwards, the Empress, Shiyu, and Ming Dong returned to the Tianyuan family. Everyone gathered in the discussion hall of the Tianyuan family. "Mother, tell me what happened in the Imperial Palace. And why hasn't my father come?" Shiyu asked frantically before everyone had even taken a seat in the discussion hall. The Empress' face darkened when she heard that. She sighed gloomily and said, "Something happened in the Shi dynasty. Ever since your father went to the forbidden grounds of the Imperial Palace, he never emerged again. Instead, the ancestral emperor who cultivated wholeheartedly in the forbidden grounds suddenly emerged and took control of the Shi dynasty again. He led the Shi dynasty to stand on the side of the Tian Empire. As for your father, in order to avenge you, he stirred up a storm of blood in the Shi dynasty. He personally slew the important figures of many large clans and organizations, which made them resent our imperial family long ago. If our imperial family remained powerful, these organizations would naturally not have dared to act up. But now that the ancestral emperor has taken control of the empire, he has mobilized most of the power of the empire to take part in the war. As a result, the internal power of the empire has been depleted. Finally, these people who resented our imperial family long ago grasped the perfect opportunity to wipe us out. With the Skyren sect as their leader, many of the clans and organizations that had grievances with us all banded together and began a bloody war against our imperial family of the Shi dynasty. As the ancestral emperor was not present in the northern region, our imperial family did not have a chaotic prime. As a result, our imperial family was forced into a constant retreat against the Skyren sect's counterattack. "Mother, is my father in danger? Otherwise, why hasn't he emerged since he entered the forbidden grounds?" She did not care about the chaos within the Shi dynasty. She still worried about her father the most. "I don't know. I really don't know what happened to Ziyun. If you say he's in danger, the people in the forbidden grounds are all seniors of our Shi clan. Not to mention that your grandfather is among them as well. How could they lay their hands on a fellow clansman?" The Empress shook her head. Her face was filled with worry. She refused to believe that it was true. "No, Mother. I have to go back. It's extremely likely that my father is in danger. I have to go save him," Shiyu said firmly. She had finally reunited with her parents after so much difficulty, so she could not allow anything to happen to her father. Chapter 2309. Could it be that we are just going to watch father fall into a dangerous situation and do nothing about it? She was helpless. Ever since her father entered the forbidden grounds, he had not emerged. Even when the Shi dynasty faced destruction, he did not appear as the current emperor. This made her even more certain that her father was in danger. She became extremely uneasy and panicked. Suddenly, she seemed to think of something. She suddenly looked at Ming Dong and pleaded with him hopefully. "Ming Dong, only you can help me now. I beg you, please save my father. I beg you, please save my father." She placed all her hopes on Ming Dong because she knew that apart from Ming Dong, she did not have the ability to invite any other chaotic prime who could fend off the ancestor of the Skyren sect. When Shiyu asked Ming Dong for help, the eyes of the elegantly dressed empress lit up slightly as well. She suddenly looked at Ming Dong as the flames of hope also burned in the depths of her eyes. Ming Dong sighed inside when he saw the pleading and hope in Shiyu's eyes. He nodded silently and said sternly, "Don't worry. Your Shi Empire has helped the Tianyuan family quite a lot in the past. Now that you're in trouble, I, Ming Dong, will naturally do my best to help." "Thank you, young hero Ming Dong. Thank you, young hero Ming Dong. If there's a chance in the future, our Shi clan will definitely repay your kindness to our Shi clan." The empress was overjoyed. She almost shed tears of gratitude. Ming Dong smiled faintly when he heard that. He said proudly, "I'm not helping your Shi Empire because I don't care if you repay my kindness or not. Even if you want to repay my kindness, your Shi Empire will probably never have the chance. The only thing you should feel fortunate about is helping the Tianyuan family in the past. Since the Tianyuan family is my brother Jinshin's clan, it's my clan as well. You've helped the Tianyuan family in the past, so you helped me as well. All right, let's not talk about this anymore. There's no time to lose. Let's set off now." Ming Dong looked at the middle-aged man behind him and said, "Uncle Ming, please cast down the formation and protect the Tianyuan family. No, it's not just the Tianyuan family. Protect the entire Dong province. This is my brother's territory after all. I don't want to see my brother's territory change by the time we return from the northern region." The middle-aged man nodded slightly and immediately got to work. Very soon, a powerful formation that enveloped the entire provincial city rose up, enveloping the entire province. Afterwards, the people accompanying the empress were left behind in the Tianyuan family. In order to prevent any traitors from doing anything detrimental to the Tianyuan family, Ming Dong instructed Uncle Ming to separate a region for these people to temporarily settle down. Afterwards, Ming Dong left with Yun Xiaoyan, Shiyu, and the empress. They left the southern region under Uncle Ming's lead. With Uncle Ming's cultivation as a chaotic prime, he moved extremely quickly. In just a few seconds, he had crossed the great distance between the southern and northern regions with them, arriving above the imperial palace of the Shi Empire. The majestic imperial palace of the Shi Empire had already been reduced to ruins. The protective formations of the imperial palace had shattered, and corpses were strewn across the ground. Blood formed rivers as the heavy smell of blood permeated the air. She was gloomy as she looked at the imperial palace that had basically been reduced to ruins. Sorrow filled her heart. How majestic was the imperial palace in the past? It was so majestic that no one dared to offend it. But now, it was completely reduced to ruins. "Let's go to the Forbidden Grounds." The empress was rather composed. She led the way at the front, directly making their way to the Forbidden Grounds. A ruddy old man in white robes sat on the tallest mountain in a mountain range several million kilometers away from the imperial capital in the Shi Empire. The old man was the ancestor of the Skyren sect. The mountain range he resided in was also the base of the Skyren sect. The Skyren sect was one of the most powerful sects in the Shi Empire. They possessed a chaotic prime, so the Skyren sect could basically stand on equal footing with the imperial family in the Shi Empire. Their status was extremely great. At this moment, the ancestor of the Skyren sect suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was very sharp, as if it could pierce through space and look in the direction of the Shi Empire. "It's the Empress' presence. She's actually reappeared in the imperial palace. Did the people we sent to kill them fail?" The ancestor of the Skyren sect frowned. As a chaotic prime, the senses of his soul were so powerful that they could envelop an entire region. As a result, he sensed the Empress as soon as she appeared in the imperial palace. Then, the heaven-cracking sect's ancestor stood up. A gentle breeze blew past, and he disappeared without a trace. The Empress led the way at the front in the imperial palace of the Shi Empire, directly bringing Ming Dong and Uncle Ming to the Forbidden Grounds. At this moment, a terrifying pressure descended from the sky. The ancestor of the Skyren sect appeared silently in the imperial palace of the Shi Empire like he had teleported. He just happened to block the Emperor's path. Although the Skyren sect was extremely distant from the imperial palace of the Shi Empire, this distance was nothing to chaotic primes who could traverse worlds with a single step. Empress, I never thought you'd be bold enough to return. The northern region is no longer under your Shi Empire's control. The ancestor of the Skyren sect stood with his arms behind his back as a tremendous presence radiated from him like a tidal wave. He glanced past Ming Dong and the others with a sharp gaze. The ancestor of the Skyren sect was not stupid. He knew that with the Empress' knowledge, she naturally knew that he would sense her as soon as she appeared in the Shi Empire. However, the Empress just happened to be bold enough to return, which meant she definitely had something she could rely on. As a result, he released his presence proactively to test what the Empress relied on to be fearless of his existence. But very soon, the ancestor of the Skyren sect's eyes narrowed. He discovered that as soon as his presence approached Shiyu, Ming Dong, and Yun Xiaoyan, it seemed to encounter an invisible wall. It was unable to advance any further. Empress, you really can't take the path to heaven, but you insist on barging through the gates of hell. Do you really think you're still the Empress who could rally everyone with a single call? Another voice boomed out, and an azure-robed middle-aged man appeared. He stood beside the ancestor of the Skyren sect. The middle-aged man was also the ancestor of one of the peak organizations of the Shi Empire, the Sword Sect of Four Poles. The ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles did not act recklessly either. Clearly, he had the same thoughts as the ancestor of the Skyren sect. The Empress stared at the ancestors of the two peak sects emotionlessly. She said nothing. However, Ming Dong stood forward from behind her and said coldly, I don't care what grievances you have with the Shi Empire in the past, but it's best if you move out of my way right now, or don't blame me for being rude. Who are you? Which clan do you come from? You need to understand that if you stand with the Empress, you'll become enemies with the Heaven's Link Peak, the ancestor of the Skyren sect of Four Poles said to the ancestor of the Skyren sect. The ancestor of the Skycracking sect said to Ming Dong. However, his gaze was more focused on Uncle Ming, who was behind Ming Dong. His expression was grave. You're from the Tian Empire? The ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles called out with a sunken face. What's with all the nonsense? Are you going to make way or not? Ming Dong frowned and showed some impatience. How arrogant. Let's see if you have the ability to make us make way. The ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles snorted coldly. The ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles snorted coldly. Sword chi immediately surged from his body as four swords suddenly appeared. With devastating power, they spun towards the Empress group. Chapter 23:10. Wherever the sword passed by, space cracked. The dense energy of the world and the surroundings retreated in all directions. This was the strength of chaotic primes. A casual strike from them possessed devastating power. They could easily split the ground and shatter mountains and rivers. The ancestor of the Heaven-Cracking sect did not attack. Instead, his eyes flickered with light as he locked onto Uncle Ming, who stood behind Ming Dong. He knew that the ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles was only using this as a probing attack. He wanted to test out the middle-aged man's strength. The ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles probing was exactly what he wanted. Although he had already guessed that the middle-aged man was a chaotic prime at the very least, he did not know what heavenly layer he was at. Old Man is a second heavenly layer chaotic prime, while Gong Sun Dao is the same as Old Man, a second heavenly layer chaotic prime. If this person is at the third heavenly layer, Old Man and Gong Sun Dao can barely fend him off if they work together. If he surpassed the third heavenly layer and reached the fourth heavenly layer, then, even if Gong Sun Dao and I work together, we probably won't be his opponent, thought the ancestor of the Skyren sect. Uncle Ming's face did not change at all as he stared at the four swords that had pierced through space. He raised his hand indifferently and extended his index finger gently. With that, a powerful pressure that caused the expressions of the ancestors of the Heaven-Cracking sect and the Sword Sect of Four Poles to change immediately descended. It condensed into a streak of golden light and shot out, colliding with the four swords of the ancestor of the Sword Sect of Four Poles in a single moment. Boom! With a great boom, the four swords of the ancestor of the sword sect of four poles were struck by the beam of golden light. With a soft hum, the four swords spun and rolled backwards. The golden streak of light from Uncle Ming's finger did not slow down at all. With the power of laws, it shot towards the ancestor of the sword sect of four poles like a hot knife through butter. Under Gongsun Dao's shocked gaze, it passed through his body and pierced his chest. Immediately, a bowl-sized hole appeared in Gongsun Dao's chest. So powerful. This person is at the 7th heavenly layer of chaotic prime at the very least. Gongsun Dao was extremely shocked. He glanced at Uncle Ming in shock before waving his hand and withdrawing the four swords. He did not dare to remain for even a moment longer, fleeing as quickly as he could. The eyes of the ancestor of the Skyrind sect suddenly narrowed. After witnessing Uncle Ming's strength, he made the same choice as the ancestor of the sword sect of four poles, leaving without any hesitation. He did not dare to stay for long. The Empress was greatly shocked when she saw the two chaotic primes flee in such a horrible manner. She knew that the middle-aged man Ming Dong, referred to as Uncle Ming, was very powerful. He was a peak expert who had already become a chaotic prime. However, she had never thought that Uncle Ming would be so powerful that even the peak expert of the Shi dynasty, Gongsun Dao, could not defeat him in a single strike. Just what heavenly layer of chaotic prime is Uncle Ming's cultivation? The Empress could not help but think of that. Although the Empress was also a primordial realm expert, she was only a late infinite prime. She was unable to tell what level of cultivation Uncle Ming possessed either. At this moment, Uncle Ming suddenly looked at the empty space up ahead. He said indifferently, "Since you've come, why don't you show yourself?" The Empress' eyes narrowed when she heard Uncle Ming's words. She immediately followed his gaze. One could see an old man's figure stealthily appear in the empty space in front of him. He was wearing a dragon robe, and his body was filled with the aura of an emperor. His deep eyes stared intently at Uncle Ming with a grave expression. Ancestral Emperor. However, when she saw the old man, the Empress' expression suddenly changed. She could not help but cry out. The old man was the most senior and most powerful person in the Shi dynasty, the ancestral emperor, Shi Lianxue. Shi Lianxue did not even glance at the Empress. He stared right at Uncle Ming with his deep eyes and said, "Ninth heavenly layer chaotic primes. Even with the entire cloud plane in perspective, there are only a handful of peak experts like that. I just happen to have seen all of them, but you're not among them." Shi Lianxue's gaze suddenly sharpened when he reached there. He called out, "Who are you? Where do you come from? Why are you interfering with the internal matters of my Shi empire?" Uncle Ming ignored Shi Lianxue. Instead, he looked at Ming Dong and said, "This person's cultivation is the same as mine. He's a ninth heavenly layer chaotic prime." Ming Dong nodded to express that he understood. "Greetings to the ancestral emperor." The Empress was unable to remain composed before Shi Lianxue. She pulled Shiyu over and bowed towards Shi Lianxue cautiously. Shi Lianxue's gaze finally landed on the Empress. He was expressionless and cold. "You must be the current Empress. Did you find these people?" "Ancestral Emperor. The Emperor has gone missing for no reason. There has been no news of him even now. I worry that the Emperor is in danger, which is why I asked young Hero Ming Dong to come and find him," the Empress said politely. Shi Lianxue's face did not change at all. He said coldly, "Ziyun is fine. Send these people back." "But," the Empress hesitated. "No buts. All of you, leave the Shi dynasty immediately." Shi Lianxue's face turned cold as he called out. The Empress' face darkened when she heard that. Her heart was filled with bitterness. She did not dare to defy the ancestral emperor's almost commanding tone. As a matter of fact, she could not even think about resisting from the bottom of her heart. This was because Shi Lianxue was the sky of the Shi dynasty. He was Poseidon, the foundation of the Shi dynasty. Although he had already abdicated many years ago and never interfered with the affairs of the empire, he still possessed supreme authority in the imperial clan. As a matter of fact, he could dismiss the current emperor with a single word. However, Shiyu, who did not grow up in the Shi dynasty, showed no respect for the ancestral emperor at all. She gritted her teeth and said stubbornly, "We won't leave until we find my father." There's no need to say anything more. At this moment, Uncle Ming walked out from behind Ming Dong. He stood with his hands behind his back at the very front of everyone. He stared at Shi Lianxue calmly and said, "He's already been affected by the demonic seed, reduced to a demonic puppet under someone's control. He's no longer the ancestral emperor you once knew." What? The empress paled in fright when she heard that. She was extremely shocked. If that's the case, there's no need to say anything more. Uncle Ming, lead the way. We'll go directly to the forbidden grounds, Ming Dong said coldly. P.S. Do you want to see Ming Dong's picture? Xiaoyao had already posted Ming Dong's picture on his public account. Please follow his WeChat account, Xinxing Xiaoyao 110, where you can directly search for his pseudonym, Xinxing. After following Xiaoyao's account, you only need to reply Xiaoyao to see it. Chapter 23:11. All right, Uncle Ming replied slowly. He took a step through the air and made his way towards the forbidden grounds of the Shi dynasty leisurely. Do you really plan on interfering with the internal matters of our Shishir empire? With a flash, the ancestral emperor, Shi Lianxue, blocked Uncle Ming's path. His face was extremely sunken, and his gaze was extremely sharp. Black demonic aura seemed to flash through his eyes as he said coldly, "You're making an enemy of the Tian Empire, of the heavenless demon Exalt. You better think about the consequences." Although Shi Lianxue had been controlled by the demonic seed and reduced to a demonic puppet, he had not lost his rationality. He still possessed the intelligence of a normal person. This is the imperial palace of the Shi dynasty. I don't want to fight with you and destroy this place. Move. You're not my opponent, Uncle Ming said indifferently. He gave off great confidence. Even though Shi Lianxue was also a 9th heavenly layer chaotic prime, he did not seem to take Shi Lianxue seriously at all. The Empress said nothing more. Only after learning from Uncle Ming that Shi Lianxue had been reduced to a demonic puppet did she truly realize the severity of the matter. At the same time, she began to worry for Shi Ziyun even more. However, before the founding emperor of the Shi dynasty, Poseidon, she felt deep fear for Shi Lianxue. She felt powerless from the bottom of her heart. She dared not disobey at all, so she could only place all her hopes on Uncle Ming. Shi Lianxue could not help but snort coldly when he saw how determined Uncle Ming was. How arrogant! With that, Shi Lianxue's eyes immediately darkened, shrouded by a layer of black aura. Powerful pulses of energy erupted from his body like a tsunami. With the power of primordial realm laws, he directly threw a punch at Uncle Ming. Uncle Ming remained composed. An umbrella-like treasure appeared in his left hand, and he tossed it behind him gently. The umbrella-like treasure immediately shone brightly. It hovered above Ming Dong and the others, enveloping them with 5-colored light. However, Uncle Ming took a step forward. Energy surged as he threw a punch with the power of primordial realm laws. This punch was so powerful that it shook the heavens and the earth. Everywhere the fist passed, the void turned into an eternal darkness, and the world seemed to be wailing. The strike of a 9th heavenly layer chaotic prime was just too shocking and terrifying. Before he had even clashed with Shi Lianxue, just the terrifying might from his strike was enough to destroy the world and shatter mountains and rivers. Boom! Finally, Uncle Ming and Shi Lianxue's fist collided with a deafening boom. Immediately, the terrifying ripples of energy turned into a devastating storm, ripping apart the sky and causing the ground to crack. The imperial palace that had been reduced to ruins in the flames of war was flattened in a single instance by the devastating storm. It was completely deformed. Only the 3 tall ancient pagodas in the forbidden area behind the imperial palace were still standing there in perfect condition. The forbidden area was personally protected by a formation cast down by Shi Lianxue. It was very powerful, which was why it remained unscathed by the storm. Uncle Ming stood as still as a mountain. He did not budge at all. An invisible power permeated his surroundings, blocking all the incoming ripples of energy. As a result, The destructive ripples of energy were unable to reach Ming Dong and the others behind him. On the other hand, Shi Lianxue's body could not help but retreat. His white hair fluttered due to the shock waves of energy. The sleeve on his right arm had already become damaged. He seemed to be in a rather miserable state. A vicious light flickered through Shi Lianxue's dark eyes. He suddenly bellowed out and formed a seal with both hands. Immediately, the tremendous might of the world permeated the surroundings. He used a god-tier battle skill. Immediately, the sky above the Shi dynasty became abnormally bright. A huge spear completely condensed from laws hovered in the sky as it shone with blinding light. The space around the spear constantly shattered as an extremely powerful presence of destruction filled the surroundings. Swoosh! In the next moment, the spear turned into a bolt of lightning. It tore through space with unbelievable speed and shot toward Uncle Ming. Uncle Ming raised his head and looked at the incoming spear. Light flickered through his eyes, and he did not dodge. Instead, he threw another punch. Immediately, the tremendous might of the world appeared once again. Uncle Ming had also used a god-tier battle skill. His fist shone with dazzling golden light, dyeing the entire sky golden. With a deafening boom, the two god-tier battle skills collided with devastating power. Shi Lianxue's spear shattered under Uncle Ming's punch, turning into a storm of energy that wreaked havoc. However, the power in Uncle Ming's punch was not exhausted. The remaining might of the god-tier battle skill landed on Shi Lianxue with the might of the world. Spurt! Shi Lianxue immediately vomited a bloody mist. His face became extremely pale in a single moment, and he was blown far away. He was heavily injured, after which he glanced coldly at Uncle Ming, who was standing in the storm of energy without being injured at all. His figure instantly vanished, leaving this place. He had gained a deep understanding of the middle-aged man's strength from the two clashes. He understood that even if he used his full strength, he would not be the middle-aged man's opponent. As a result, he left decisively. When Shi Lianxue fled in defeat, the ancestor of the Skyren sect was extremely shocked in outer space several million kilometers away. He stared in the direction of the Imperial Palace as he struggled to remain calm. This person is so powerful. Even the ancestral emperor of the Shi Empire, Shi Lianxue, is not his opponent. The ancestor of the Skyren sect could not help but cry out. He became extremely stern. Shi Lianxue has returned from the central region. No one knows whether he'll target our Skyren sect or not. With his cultivation as a 9th heavenly layer chaotic prime, even if he's injured, Old Man is definitely not his opponent, the ancestor of the Skyren sect said. I can't stay in the Skyren sect any longer. I have to hurry to the God's Fallen clan immediately. The group, led by the Heaven's Link Peak, has all gathered in the God's Fallen clan. I can only leave the remaining members of the Shi clan to them, the ancestor of the Skyren sect said through gritted teeth. He hated the Imperial clan very much. In the past, the current emperor, Shi Ziyun, had led a group of experts to surround the Skyren sect in order to avenge his daughter, causing the Skyren sect to suffer a great loss. In the end, Shi Ziyun had personally executed a great elder of the Skyren sect right before the ancestor of the Skyren sect. The ancestor of the Skyren sect had always remembered this grievance. However, due to the strength of the Imperial clan, he had never dared to act recklessly. Only when the Shi Empire joined the Skyren sect under Shi Lianxue's lead did the ancestor of the Skyren sect find an opportunity for revenge. Chapter 23:12. The protective formation here is not weak. Even ordinary primordial chaos experts will find it difficult to break through it. Step back. Back up, Uncle Ming said to everyone. Once they had retreated to a certain distance away, he directly threw a punch at the protective formation. Immediately, the protective formation of the Forbidden Grounds erupted with scorching light. Surging energy surged out from the depths of the ground and the three towers, gathering within the protective formation. The protective formation began to absorb all the energy in the surroundings on its own, pushing its defenses to the limit. However, in the end, The protective formation was still unable to fend off Uncle Ming's punch. After pushing its defenses to the limit, it was shattered by Uncle Ming's punch. As soon as the defensive array was broken, the 3 ancient pagodas were exposed. After destroying the protective formation, Uncle Ming's punch did not slow down at all. It struck the 3 towers at the same time with earth-shaking ripples of energy. Bang! With a muffled sound, the 3 ancient pagodas that had stood there for who knew how many tens of thousands of years trembled slightly and turned into a pile of ashes that scattered with the wind. The ancient pagoda disappeared, revealing 3 figures. At this moment, these 3 figures were sitting together with their eyes closed. Black chains were wrapped around their bodies. The black chains were completely condensed from pure energy. Not only did they bind their bodies, but they also sealed up their cultivation. The 3 of them were the current Emperor Shi Ziyun, and the 2 ancestral emperors of the Shi Empire, Shi Haoshuan and Shi Haoming. Ziyun, father. The Empress and Shi Yu's faces changed drastically when they saw Shi Ziyun in his dragon robes and bound by black chains. They both cried out and charged over without any regard. At this moment, the black chains binding Shi Ziyun and the other 2 quickly dimmed. After the protective formation and the 3 ancient pagodas were destroyed, the black chains seemed to have lost their source of energy. After a few breaths of time, they completely disappeared. With the disappearance of the black chains, Shi Ziyun and the other 2 abruptly opened their tightly shut eyes. Immediately, a sharp light shot out from their eyes. The 3 of them recovered all their cultivation in a single instance. Their presences surged into the sky, completely displaying the powerful presences of chaotic primes. Erase your presences. Don't hurt you. The Empress let out a sigh of relief when she saw the 3 of them recover. She immediately pulled Shi Yu behind her and scolded her. The 3 of them were surprised when they heard that. They all withdrew their presences, and with a single thought, they saw the surroundings. Immediately, their expressions changed. What the hell happened? Why has the imperial palace of our Shi Empire become like this? Where's the ancestral emperor? Where is he? We have something to ask him, Shi Haoming and Shi Haoshuan both called out. Clearly, after being trapped by Shi Lianxue, the 3 of them had no idea what had happened in the outside world. Now that they had broken free, they were shocked by the sight that greeted them. Next, the Empress recounted everything that had happened during this period of time to the 3 of them in detail. After listening to the Empress' story, Shi Ziyun, Shi Haoshuan, and Shi Haoming finally understood that the cloud plane had undergone an overwhelming change while they were trapped. The ancestral emperor has actually been reduced to a demonic puppet. Why? No wonder the ancestral emperor would suddenly attack the 3 of us. As it turns out, he's no longer the ancestral emperor we know. The 3 of them became sorrowful when they heard that Shi Lianxue had been reduced to a demonic puppet. Let's put the ancestral emperor's matter aside for now. At this moment, Emperor Shi's father, Shi Haoshuan, said sternly, "The changes of the cloud plane are a disaster for all the organizations that stand on the cloud plane. It's very difficult to say whether our Shi Empire can survive this disaster. Let's properly think about how we should deal with this disaster. The current cloud plane has already been split into 2 factions, the Tian Empire and the Heaven's Link Peak. Unless our Shi Empire gives up on what we have here, we can only join one of the 2 factions. We have no choice but to remain neutral," said Shi Haoming. "Regardless, our Shi Empire will never yield to the Tian Empire. I suggest we join the Heaven's Link Peak and resist the Tian Empire. We can't let the Tian Empire unite the cloud plane, or it will directly harm our interests," said Shi Ziyun. Shi Haoming and Shi Haoshuan did not express their opinions in a hurry. Instead, they both looked at Ming Dong. The 3 of them had already learned from the Empress that they had only managed to break free this time because of Ming Dong. "Ming Dong, may I ask if you—" Shi Haoshuan wanted to ask about Ming Dong's stance, but before he could finish, Ming Dong waved his hand. "Don't ask me. Whatever happens on the cloud plane has nothing to do with me. You can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't affect our Tianyuan family." Shi Haoshuan became disappointed when he saw how he was unable to convince Ming Dong. He turned to Shi Ziyun and Shi Haoming. If that's the case, let's stand with the Heavens Link Peak and stop the Tian Empire's path to supremacy. Shi Ziyun, you're the current emperor, so I'll leave it to you to explain to the Heavens Link Peak. Although the Heavens Link Peak is weaker right now, they won't be defeated so easily. Also, although the Sword Sect of Four Poles and the Skyrim Sect have killed many people from our imperial family recently, you have to consider the bigger picture during these sensitive times. The God's Fallen clan also possessed a Grand Prime in the northern region of the Cloud Plain. They were a peak clan that stood at the apex of the plain. Currently, an alliance of several peak clans on the Cloud Plain, led by the Heavens Link Peak, had gathered in the God's Fallen clan. They used the northern region as a line of defense to stop the Tian Empire's path to supremacy. In a majestic divine hall within the God's Fallen clan, the Lord of the Heavens Link Peak, the ancestor of the God's Fallen clan, Luo Man Tian, the ancestor of the Tong family, Tong Wuming, the ancestor of the Fire God clan, Lian Wuji, the ancestor of the Cosmic Sect, Zhou Zhidao, the ancestor of the Taoist Sect of Emergence, Yi Dao, the ancestor of the Heav-Shaking Sect, Gu Li, and so on. They were all peak figures who could shake up the entire Cloud Plain with just a stomp of their feet. Some of them were already injured. Their presences were clearly weak, clearly left behind from the clash with the Tian Empire earlier. In terms of peak strength, we have the same number of people as the Tian Empire, but the Tian Empire has the Heavenless Demon Exalt, so we're slightly weaker. The Tian Empire directly controls the four eternal empires, so they're at least twice as powerful as us in terms of both numbers and strength. Right now, we're weaker than the Tian Empire in terms of both peak strength and middle strength. Our battle against the Tian Empire is not optimistic at all, Luo Man Tian said sternly.